Chapter 692. After all, killing a few people was not as easy as killing a few chickens. At least he soon found out that the people he sent over did not achieve the effect he wanted. Therefore, the next morning the head of the Bai family came to visit in person. The Bai family was known as the most powerful family in the Emperor of Xiling. Their status in West Hill was similar to that of the original Su family in Dechu State. However, the Su family did not like to monopolize political affairs and prioritized learning. The Bai family was the opposite. Since the founding of West Hill, the Bai family had been high-ranking officials in the imperial court. Even among the concubines of West Hill, there were many women from the Bai family. The Bai family had produced several empresses and dozens of imperial concubines. It could be said that they were the family of the empress. However, ever since Regent Enchanting came to power, even though the empress was still a woman of the Bai family, and even imperial concubine Su Zuidi, who was doted on by everyone, entered the palace using the Bai family's surname. Although the Bai family and Genom of Gojoseon had many secret connections, there was only one thing. The empress had no children, and Genom of Gojoseon's late concubine and the current Genom of Gojoseon's wife were not surnamed Bai. This caused the Bai family's power to decline imperceptibly. Enchanting's scheming was not comparable to the cowardly Emperor of Xiling. Therefore he used the Bai family and did not deprive them of their power because they were the family of the empress. However, he would never let the Bai family be as glorious as before. Therefore, in recent years, not to mention the palace and Jinan Palace, there were very few women of the Bai family who married into the imperial family. After a long time, the Bai family could see that Genom of Gojoseon was suppressing them. A family like the Bai family naturally did not value loyalty and patriotism. To them, the continuation of the family, wealth and power were the most important. Therefore, when the Mahist army arrived at the city, they were already planning their future. And the Su family of Dechu State was undoubtedly a model for them to follow. The Su family had only married off a granddaughter to Prince Ding. Now the Su family's power in Prince Ding's fu could be said to be second to none. The Bai family had never thought of replacing Princess Ding. But as long as Prince Ding took a fancy to a girl from the Bai family's status in the Emperor of Xiling City would be greatly different from the other Xiling families. Therefore, among the 8 men and women who were sent over by the servants, there were 2 young mistresses and 1 young master of the Bai family who were born of a concubine. However, there was no more news of these people after they entered the post house. Because the Mahist army was out to fight, they didn't bring any maids or servants with them. Other than Mo Xiuyao, Yi Li and other personal attendants in the courier hostel, most of the people doing the rough work were from West Hill. These Xiling families couldn't do anything else, but they could gather some information. The courier hostel wasn't large, but there was no news of those people at all. Obviously they were doomed. How could the master of the Bai family not be anxious? Master Bai, the prince invites you. After being left to drink tea in the outer hall for an hour, the master of the Bai family was somewhat anxious and unhappy, but he didn't show it on his face. When he saw Lin Han who came to pass on the message, he didn't have the arrogance of a master of an aristocratic family. He nodded politely and said with a smile, "Thank you, young master. Please lead the way." The place where Mo Xiuyao received the master of the Bai family was still in the small courtyard of the courier hostel. The courier hostel wasn't very big. The inner courtyard was where Yi Li and Mo Xiuyao lived. These days Yi Li was in a bad mood, so Mo Xiuyao naturally didn't allow outsiders to disturb her. Most of the official business was handled in the study in the outer courtyard. When the master of the Bai family was led to the garden by Lin Han, Mo Xiuyao was sitting under a tree holding something in his hand and slowly sculpting it. The master of the Bai family glanced at it and saw that it was a hairpin that had already been carved into a line. Although he couldn't tell what it was at first, but seeing how carefully Mo Xiuyao was sculpting it, he knew that it must be very important. And looking at the quality of the jade, the master of the Bai family couldn't help but feel his heart skip a beat. It was a piece of white warm jade of the highest quality. Warm jade of this quality was rare even in the entire Xiling kingdom. And there was only one piece in the Emperor of Xiling City. The master of the Bai family had coveted it, but in the end, it was bought by the Sun family. More importantly, the jade that he had been thinking of asking a jade carving master to carve a rare treasure was now an inconspicuous hairpin in Prince Ding's hand. The master of the Bai family couldn't help but feel bitter and hateful. Mo Xiuyao didn't pay attention to the person standing in front of him. He held the carving knife in one hand and the jade hairpin in the other, frowning with dissatisfaction. It had been too long since he had worked, so he was a little rusty. I am Bai Yunqing from the Bai family of Xiling. Greetings to your highness Prince Ding. The master of the Bai family knew that if he didn't say anything, Prince Ding wouldn't pay attention to him even if he stood there for 2 to 4 hours. Although he felt a little uncomfortable thinking about the analysis of the Prince Ding mansion by his aides, the master of the Bai family felt that he could tolerate it. Mo Shuyao carefully put the jade hairpin and carving knife in his hand back into a sandalwood box beside him. Then he looked up at Bai Yunqing and nodded. So it's the master of the Bai family. Nice to meet you. Please sit. The corner of Bai Yunqing's mouth twitched. He looked around and said, "Thank you for your kindness, Prince Ding. I'll just stand." There was no chair in sight, not even a stone bench. Mo Shuyao just sat on a stone by the side of the rockery. Naturally, he didn't plan to specially prepare a chair for him. Mo Shuyao raised an eyebrow and didn't care. As long as Master Bai is happy. Bai Yunqing couldn't help but vomit blood in his heart. Was he happy? He was an old master of a family, how could he casually sit on the ground? Why has the Bai family come? Mo Shuyao asked carelessly. Bai Yunqing said respectfully, "Your Highness Prince Ding and your Highness have just come to the Imperial City. I can barely be considered a host. I just want to be a good host. Prince Ding and your Highness, please do me the honor." Mo Shuyao shook his head and said helplessly, "It's not that I don't want to give face to Master Bai, but your Highness hasn't been feeling well these days. I'm afraid I have to thank Master Bai for his kindness." Bai Yunqing was overjoyed. The reason he brought Princess Ding was out of courtesy. The Bai family wanted to send someone to the Prince Ding mansion, but they didn't want to offend Princess Ding. Naturally, it was best that Princess Ding wasn't here. Then I wonder if Prince... Bai Yunqing probed. Mo Shuyao shook his head and said, "Your Highness isn't feeling well. I feel uneasy and don't want to go out." As such, Bai Yunqing could only smile apologetically. Prince Ding had already rejected him so cleanly. He couldn't say anything else. Otherwise, it would have the opposite effect. Thinking about it, Bai Yunqing could only try to change the topic that Prince Ding would be interested in. "In a month, the Emperor will be moving the capital to An City. I wonder if your Highness Prince Ding has plans to move the capital. Move to the Imperial City temporarily?" Although Bai Yunqing hadn't been to the northwest, he still had some understanding of Glass City. For people who lived in the Imperial City for a long time, Glass City was really unpresentable. It wasn't that Glass City wasn't prosperous. In fact, after the Prince Ding Mansion's management these years, Glass City's prosperity didn't lose to the Chu capital or the Emperor of Xiling City. In just a few short years, it had such an effect. It could be seen that Prince Ding was very capable. But the most important place in Glass City, the Prince Ding Mansion, couldn't compare to the Chu capital or Xiling's imperial palace. After so many years, it was only a mansion that was slightly larger than other mansions. Therefore, in Bai Yunqing's opinion, Mo Shuyao moving the Prince Ding Mansion's political center to the Emperor of Xiling City was a foregone conclusion. Chapter 693. Mo Shuyao shook his head and said calmly, "The Emperor of Xiling City is not suitable to be the capital." The Emperor of Xiling City was grand and majestic, but it was too far away from the Central Plains. Any ruler with ambitions to conquer the Central Plains would not choose this place as their capital. After all, the heroes who grew up with the culture of the Central Plains wanted to unite the Central Plains and not dominate the western regions. Back then, the founding ancestor of Xiling had chosen this place mostly because the Chu at the time was too powerful. Bai Yunqing was not a mediocre person. He understood what Mo Shuyao said after thinking about it for a while. His heart couldn't help but tremble as he looked at Mo Shuyao with even more respect. There were many people who were secretly debating whether Mo Shuyao's sudden attack on Xiling was coincidental or premeditated. But looking at the white-robed, white-haired young ruler in front of him, Bai Yunqing suddenly believed that Mo Shuyao had premeditated this. Thinking of this, Bai Yunqing's eyes shone brighter and his determination became more resolute. "The prince is ambitious and I admire you. The Bai family is willing to serve you faithfully. I hope the prince will not abandon us," Bai Yunqing said respectfully. Mo Shuyao looked up and calmly looked at the middle-aged man in front of him. Bai Yunqing seemed to feel a strange pressure coming from all directions. If he hadn't been careful, he would have knelt down on the spot. Even when facing Zhenan Wang, he didn't feel this kind of pressure that seemed to have materialized. Bai Yunqing maintained a respectful appearance, but a thin layer of sweat appeared on his forehead. After a long time, Mo Xiuyao said indifferently, "Patriarch Bai, you don't have to be so courteous. This king will return to Glass City soon. In the future, I will need Patriarch Bai's help in many matters here." Bai Yunqing was overjoyed and hurriedly replied, "Many thanks, Your Highness. The Bai family will not dare to disappoint Your Highness." Mo Xiuyao nodded and was about to say something when Zhuo Jing came in and reported, "Prince, the master of the Sun family wishes to see you." Hearing this, Bai Yunqing's heart sank. Originally, the Bai family and the Sun family did not have much to do with each other. One was in politics and the other was in business. There was no deep hatred between the two families. But when Genom of Gojoseon was in power, although the Sun family was not loyal to the royal family, they did not like Genom of Gojoseon. Genom of Gojoseon had plundered a lot of gold and silver from the Sun family many times through the hands of the Bai family. By the time the Bai family understood that Genom of Gojoseon wanted to sow discord between the two families, the hatred had already been formed. In the past few years, the Sun family and the Bai family had been fighting openly and secretly. Genom of Gojoseon did not help either side and allowed them to fight. When one side was weaker, he would even lend a helping hand. As a result, the hatred between the two families became deeper and deeper. Now no one was in the mood to resolve it. Bai Yunqing had just joined the Prince Ding mansion. Naturally, he did not want the Sun family to be more powerful than him. Unfortunately, he could not make the decision now. Mo Xiuyao would not refuse to see the Sun family even if it was because of the top-quality warm jade. As expected, after hearing Zhuo Jing's words, Mo Xiuyao raised his eyebrows and said, "Let him in." Not long after, the head of the Sun family had already strode in. Unlike Bai Yunqing, who was over 50 years old, the master of the Sun family was completely different from the master of the Bai family. More importantly, she was a woman. The master of the Sun family was not yet 30 years old. Her appearance was not very outstanding, but she was still dignified. There was a valiant and neat aura between her eyebrows that ordinary women did not have. At first glance, one could tell that she was a woman of character. No wonder she dared to make things difficult for Princess Lingyun. She was the wife of the previous master of the Sun family. The previous master of the Sun family had been ill since he was young. After Madame Sun married into the Sun family, she took care of most of the Sun family's affairs. 3 years ago, the master of the Sun family died of illness. Madame Sun, who only had one daughter, used her identity as a woman to suppress the side branches who coveted the Sun family's wealth. She became the master of the Sun family as a widow and waited for her only daughter to grow up and find a son-in-law to inherit the Sun family's bloodline. Although Shi Ling's restrictions on women were not as strict as the Dechu state, Madame Sun was able to stand firm as a widow in this imperial city surrounded by strong enemies. Her methods and knowledge were ordinary. "I am Sun Yusher Huinyang. Greetings to Prince Ding." Madame Sun was not like ordinary women who called themselves servants or concubines. Instead, she called herself "I am like a man." Her bearing was free and easy, natural and unrestrained. It made people have a good impression at first sight. Mo Xiuyao smiled faintly and said, "I have long heard that the master of the Sun family is a woman who is not inferior to men. Today I see that you live up to your reputation. Madame Sun, please sit." Madame Sun smiled and thanked him. She did not mind sitting down on a rock not far from Mo Xiuyao's side. Mo Xiuyao turned his head and said to Lin Han behind him, "Go and see if Wang Fei is free. Didn't she say that she wanted to see Madame Sun the day before yesterday?" Madame Sun quickly said, "I don't dare. I should go and pay my respects to Wang Fei." Mo Xiuyao waved his hand faintly and said, "Lili does not care about this." Moreover, the courier station was not as big as the original Ai's residence. The temporary residence in the inner courtyard, whether it was Yi Li or Mo Xiuyao, was not willing for outsiders to set foot in. Lin Han accepted the order and left. Mo Xiuyao smiled faintly and said, "Master Bai and Madame Sun must be old acquaintances?" With his insight, even if he did not know beforehand, it was impossible for him not to see that these two families did not get along. But neither Madame Sun nor Bai Yunqing dared to show it in front of him. Both of them were superiors and naturally understood Prince Ding's thoughts. As superiors, it was impossible for them to use a large amount of time to reconcile the conflicts of their subordinates. It was also impossible for them to give up on one family just because they did not get along. As long as it did not interfere with the matters of the Prince Ding mansion, Prince Ding had no intention of interfering in the conflict between the two families. But they could not let the conflict between the two families annoy Prince Ding. Madame Sun smiled faintly and said, "Prince Ding is right. The Sun and Bai families have lived in the imperial city for a long time and are naturally old acquaintances. To be able to see Master Bai here today, this one is not honored." Bai Yunqing pulled the corners of his mouth and said with a smile, "Madame Sun is too humble. Madame Sun has been busy. I haven't seen you for a long time, but you are still as elegant as ever." A cold light flashed through Madame Sun's eyes, but she said with a smile, "Master Bai is too kind." As a widow, even Madame Sun had to be careful. What she hated the most was others talking about her appearance. First, as a widow, she could not dress up too beautifully. Second, if someone thought too deeply about her appearance, they would think that she was not a woman. "Wang Fei has come." Hearing the voice of the guard at the door, Mo Shuyao immediately put down Bai and Sun, who had been talking, and went to greet her. Bai Yunqing and Madame Sun looked over curiously. They wanted to see what this Princess Ding, who was famous in the world and had caused Prince Ding to be so affectionate, really looked like. Yili was only wearing a light blue robe with dark embroidery today, her hair loosely tied up in a bun. A tasseled hairpin was inserted at an angle. As she moved, the jade bead hanging by her cheek swayed slightly, making her appear even more fragile. When they walked closer, they saw that her face was slightly pale, and there seemed to be a shadow between her brows. It seemed that Prince Ding was not lying when he said that Wang Fei was not feeling well. However, the famous Princess Ding was not known for her beauty, but for her talent and martial arts. The two of them had not seen her when she entered the city that day, so they did not dare to believe it. How could the Princess Ding, who was said to be skilled in battle, be such a delicate young woman? Chapter 694. "Lily, are you still not feeling well? I'll have Shuijing bring a doctor in from outside the city for you to take a look." Looking at Yi Li's haggard appearance compared to yesterday, Mo Shuyao pulled her into his arms with worry and carefully held her waist. Yi Li smiled faintly and said, "It's nothing. I just didn't sleep well last night." "As expected, without I to take care of you, Lily can't sleep well?" Hearing this, Mo Shuyao instantly became smug. Ignoring Yi Li's thoughts, he said firmly, "I should stay tonight to take care of Lily, otherwise, Lily won't be able to sleep well again. Right now there is no one to take care of her. How can I be at ease with Lily alone?" Yi Li glared helplessly at Mo Shuyao and then looked faintly at Bai Yunqing and Sun Furen. Bai Yunqing and Sun Furen didn't think wrongly. They just thought that Princess Ding was sick and was worried that she would pass her illness on to Prince Ding, so they lived in separate rooms. At the same time, they were surprised that Prince Ding was so attentive and willing to be a servant for Wang Fei. But Bai Yunqing was worried and Sun Furen was envious. "Greetings to Wang Fei." The two stood and said in unison. Yi Li nodded and smiled faintly. "By family head Sun Furen, no need to be so courteous." The two thanked Yi Li. Yi Li said, "I've prepared tea and refreshments in front. Why don't you come over and sit for a while?" The two didn't refuse and respectfully invited Mo Shuyao and Yi Li to go first. Actually, after turning a corner, tea and refreshments were placed on the stone table. The host and guest sat down. Sun Furen looked at Yi Li and asked with concern, "Wang Fei's complexion is not good. Are you not feeling well?" Bai Yunqing naturally wouldn't let Sun Furen be the only one in the limelight. He smiled and said, "This one has a few skilled doctors in my fu. Why don't I send them over for Wang Fei to use?" Yi Li smiled faintly and said, "Thank you for your concern. It's probably because you haven't rested well in the Emperor of Xiling City. It's not a problem." This was not Yi Li's excuse. Other than the slight injuries she suffered when she was pregnant with Mo Xiaobao and when she gave birth to him, her body had always been in excellent condition. Over the past few years, Xin Yang and Dr. Lin had carefully nursed him back to health, and he had already recovered. In this short period of time, his heart was vexed for no reason, but his body really didn't feel any discomfort. Yi Li had always believed that every medicine had a side effect. If she wasn't sick, she naturally wouldn't go see a doctor. Madame Sun said, "Glass City and the Imperial City are very far apart, and the climate is also quite different. It was normal for the princess consort not to be used to it. My residence is quite proficient in the art of nourishing food. When I return, I will order someone to deliver the recipe. Why don't the princess consort try it? Madame Sun said this. Yili didn't refuse and only thanked her with a smile. Bai Yunqing also smiled and said, my residence's chef is very proficient in Eastern Chu's dishes. The princess consort probably isn't used to Xiling's food. When I return, I will send someone over for the princess consort to order. I'm not that weak. How would I dare trouble Master Bai? Yili said. Bai Yunqing smiled and said, to be able to serve the princess consort is their fortune. Yili wasn't someone who didn't know how to manage affairs. She accepted the Sun family's goodwill, so she couldn't ignore the Bai family. The art of balance was never something that could be done according to one's wishes. She didn't refuse and nodded, saying, then I thank Master Bai. Bai Yunqing hurriedly said that he didn't dare. Mo Shuyao held the teacup in one hand and held Yi Li's hand under the table with the other. He frowned slightly at the slight coldness of the touch. Li's body had always been good. Now that her constitution was slightly cold, it was naturally not a good thing. She really should have a good nourishment. Therefore her expression towards Sun and Bai became more relaxed. The four of them chatted idly as they drank tea. They were the guests and the host. If one didn't look at the hidden struggle between Bai Yunqing and Madame Sunday rather than an open struggle, it was more accurate to say that Bai Yunqing was unilaterally targeting Madame Sunday. Madame Sun was somewhat disinterested in Bai Yunqing. Madame Sun understood that no matter how attentive Bai Yunqing was now, the Bai family would offend Princess Ding sooner or later. This was something that had been decided from the very beginning of the Bai family's nature. The Bai family had been a family of concubines since the founding of Xiling. To put it simply, they had climbed up along the belt of their skirts. The Bai family had almost never produced any amazing big shots, but in the history of the Bai family, there had been several prime ministers and many senior officials. All of this depended on the status of the Bai family's daughter in the harem. Therefore, although the Bai family had always been a prominent family in Xiling, the families with real ability and heritage secretly looked down on them. Now the Bai family had sought refuge with the Prince Ding mansion. However, the Bai family, including Bai Yunqing, was not a powerful genius. Otherwise, they wouldn't have been casually suppressed by Genom of Gojoseon for so many years. They had a legitimate empress, but they still couldn't make a comeback. If the Bai family wanted to regain a high status in the Prince Ding mansion and restore the glory of the past, they could only continue to move forward along the path that they had taken. And there was no doubt that this would inevitably offend the Prince Ding mansion and the Su family. Therefore, Madame Sun didn't feel the need to fight with Bai Yunqing in front of Prince Ding and Princess Ding. She didn't want the Prince Ding and the princess to feel that she was aggressive. But Bai Yunqing didn't think so. In Bai Yunqing's opinion, it was unbearable to let Madame Sun, a widow, suppress him in front of Prince Ding. What's more, the hatred between the Sun family and the Bai family couldn't be resolved. If the Sun family was valued, they would definitely take revenge for these years. In this case, it was better for the Bai family to take the initiative. Before noon, Bai Yunqing and Madame Sun consciously got up and left. Before leaving, Madame Sun invited Yi Li to attend an autumn flower party for womenfolk in the capital 2 days later. Although the Emperor of Xiling was about to change hands, the dignitaries in the imperial city didn't cower at home because of this. Instead, they gathered more frequently. The leaders and mistresses of each family gathered together to inquire about the plans and intentions of other families. Families with good relationships by marriage took the opportunity to discuss their own retreat plans and so on. All of these needed to be carried out through various banquets. After all, although the Emperor of Xiling was about to move south, most of the power in Xiling City was still in the hands of the Emperor of Xiling. Especially those who had disloyalty and other plans, few dared to visit Prince Ding openly like the Bai family and the Sun family. Yi Li had a good impression of this generous and free Madame Sunday. She also understood that the intention of holding the so-called autumn flower party at this time was naturally not just to enjoy the flowers. After all, there were no flowers to enjoy in autumn in Xiling. After thinking about it, she agreed. Madame Sun also left happily. When Bai Yunqing heard this, he secretly planned to implement the plan as soon as possible. When Bai Yunqing returned to the mansion, Madame Bai, who had been waiting for a long time, immediately greeted him and asked with concern, "Master, have you seen Prince Ding and Princess Ding?" Bai Yunqing nodded. Seeing this, Madame Bai showed some joy and smiled. "Then the people we sent over?" Bai Yunqing snorted and said coldly, "A bunch of trash. I'm afraid it bodes ill rather than well." Hearing this, Madame Bai's heart trembled. It should be known that the few people who were sent over a few days ago were not really servants. Among them, there were 3 Bai family's illegitimate sons and daughters. Prince Ding is actually so ruthless. But these few days there are also many families sending people over. Why is it only our family? Madame Bai recovered from her shock after being shocked. Although the few people sent over were the children of the Bai family, they were not her biological children. Naturally, she didn't feel sorry for them. But she was more worried about whether Prince Ding was dissatisfied with the Bai family. Chapter 695. Bai Yunqing frowned and pondered for a moment. He said uncertainly, maybe. Prince Ding found out the identities of those people? Is that why he is unhappy? Bai Yunqing was also the head of the family. Naturally, he understood some taboos as a superior. Madame Bai sighed helplessly and said, "We have indeed thought too simply. The secret guards of Prince Ding's residence are well informed. I'm afraid we can't hide it from them." But she didn't know that if Prince Ding's residence wanted to investigate, they would naturally be able to find out. However, the few people sent by the Bai family were unlucky and happened to meet Imo Shuyao's blade. They died mysteriously without even seeing him. Today I went to visit Prince Ding and happened to meet the woman of the Sun family. Thinking of Madame Sun's smile before she left, Bai Yunqing's face became gloomier. Madame Bai's face also changed. Many noble ladies in the Emperor of Xiling City had always looked down on Madame Sunday. Perhaps it should be said that they were jealous of Madame Sunday. As a woman, she could take charge of the family business like a man. When the head of the Sun family was alive, there were no concubines in his room. Therefore, when the head of the Sun family passed away, many women in Xiling City secretly gloated and covered their mouths to laugh. However, Madame Sun was not as down and out as they thought. Instead, she supported the entire Sun family with just a single woman and child, and even made the Sun family rise to a higher level than before. How could this not make Madame Bai, a woman who could only live in the backyard, hate and envy her? That woman. Why did she go to see Prince Ding? Could it be? Madame Bai screamed. Bai Yunqing saw his wife's expression and knew that she had misunderstood. However, he was not in the mood to explain for Madame Sunday. He just said in a low voice, "Prince Ding and Princess Ding have a good impression of Madame Sunday." Princess Ding also promised to attend the Autumn Flower Festival in 2 days. Madame Bai was not ignorant. She asked softly, "What do you mean, master?" Bai Yunqing said in a low voice, "You go 2 days later. You must make a good impression on Princess Ding. Also, bring Ninger with you." "Master?" Madame Bai frowned as she looked at Bai Yunqing. She hesitated for a moment before saying, "I'm afraid it won't be easy to start with Princess Ding." Although she didn't know much about the outside world, Madame Bai was a woman after all. She naturally understood the thoughts of women more than a man like Bai Yunqing. If they wanted to send the women of the Bai family to the Prince Ding mansion, they would not be able to do it through Princess Ding. Prince Ding and Princess Consort were deeply in love. Even after being married for many years, Prince Ding had never taken a concubine. No matter what, Princess Ding would not like a woman who wanted to enter the Prince Ding mansion to fight for her husband. However, Bai Yunqing did not mind. "Madam, you're thinking too much. I also saw Princess Ding today. Although her beauty is outstanding, our Ning is also not bad. Moreover, Princess Ding was born in the Su family, which is also a famous family. How would she not know how to be a wife? Most women in West Hill are arrogant and domineering. Our Ning is gentle and obedient, so Princess Consort will naturally think highly of her. If Prince Ding wants to settle down Xiling in a short period of time, he will definitely need to marry a Xiling noble lady as his concubine to pacify Xiling's nobles." The Bai family had many concubines in the past generations. The men were not really useless. At least in terms of how to seize the opportunity to send their women to the top, the Bai family was quite knowledgeable. The Mahist army had just taken over West Hill, so it was inevitable that people were nervous. And Prince Ding obviously could not stay in the Emperor of Xiling for a long time. Therefore, it was necessary to marry a West Hill noble's daughter as his concubine to appease the people. In Bai Yunqing's opinion, the most suitable candidate was the daughter of the Bai family. Madame Bai sighed helplessly. How could she tell her master? The more powerful a woman was, the more she could not tolerate other people around her husband. But thinking that her daughter was raised according to the standards of the emperor's concubine, perhaps there would be no problem? Mississippi. The sound of a servant girl bowing came from outside the door. Before she finished speaking, a beautiful woman in a colorful dress walked slowly into the hall and bowed to Bai Yunqing and Madame Bai Ning greets father and mother. In terms of appearance alone, this woman didn't seem to be a heavenly beauty. At least she was inferior to Su Zuodi, who had also lived in the Bai family. But she was comparable to Princess Lingyun. But her eyebrows were black and her red lips were slightly curved in a smile. Compared to Princess Lingyun's arrogance, it was easier for people to feel close to her. This woman was the only unmarried daughter of the Bai family, Bai Qingning. When Madame Bai saw her daughter, a trace of affection flashed through her eyes. She quickly helped her up and said, "Ning, why are you here?" Bai Qingning smiled and said, "I heard that father had returned from visiting Prince Ding and Princess Ding, so I came to pay my respects to father." "Father, did you really see Princess Ding?" When Bai Yunqing saw his favorite daughter, his expression softened. He nodded and said with a smile, "That's right, father did see Princess Ding." Then, Bai Qingning asked curiously, "It is said that Princess Ding is one of the greatest heroines in the world. What does she look like?" Bai Yunqing shook his head and sighed. "Princess Ding is also a peerless beauty. Prince Ding is really lucky." Bai Yunqing's words were not false. Most of the women in the world were weak. Perhaps some who could take care of the inner chambers well were already considered virtuous. Those who could interfere with the outer chambers were mostly unruly. As for those who could lead troops on the battlefield in the eyes of the world, they were about the same as female Rakshasas and female Yakshas. And this Princess Ding, whether it was in the politics of the Prince Ding mansion or on the battlefield, was quite impressive. What was even rarer was that she was born with an elegant, gentle and delicate appearance. It was no wonder that Prince Ding treated her like a treasure. Bai Qingning's eyes flashed and she said softly, "Then could it be that Princess Ding is even more beautiful than Aunt Bai Long?" Su Zuodi had stayed in the Bai family for a short period of time. After that, Bai Qingning often went in and out of the palace and saw her a few times. She only felt that she was the most beautiful woman in the world. Even though she was proud of her appearance, she knew that she could not compare to her. Could it be that this Princess Ding was even more beautiful than her, and that was why Prince Ding was so affectionate? Bai Yunqing shook his head and said with a smile, "That's not true. Although Princess Ding is beautiful, my Ning is not bad." "Is that so?" Bai Qingning lowered her eyes and replied in a daze. Bai Yunqing looked at his daughter with satisfaction and ordered with a smile, "Ning go and prepare well. In 2 days accompany your mother to attend the Autumn Flower Festival." Bai Qingning was surprised. "Autumn Flower Festival?" "That's right." Bai Yunqing stroked his beard and said with a smile, "Ning aren't you curious about what Princess Ding looks like? In 2 days, Princess Ding will also attend the Autumn Flower Festival. Ning can go and see Princess Ding. Isn't that great?" Bai Qingning's eyes lit up and she nodded with a smile. "Father is right. Princess Ding is the role model of all women in the world. I have admired her for a long time. If I can see her, it will be the fortune of 3 lifetimes." Bai Yunqing smiled. "That's great. Ning go." Chapter 696. 2 days later, the Autumn Flower Festival was held in the largest flower garden in the southwest of the Emperor of Xiling. Supposedly, this flower garden had originally belonged to the Emperor of Xiling's family. Later it had been bestowed to a certain prince. Later the Wang Fu declined, but the imperial family did not take it back. Instead it flowed into the common people. In the last decade, it had fallen into the hands of the Sun family. Compared to the blooming flowers of Dechu State, Xiling did not have many famous flowers to admire at this time. However, there was still an endless stream of noble women who came to the flower festival, even more than in the past. At the entrance to the garden, Sun Furen had been waiting with people outside for a long time. The noble women who came and went had naturally heard the news that the Sun family was now attached to the Prince Ding mansion. With Sun Furen's status, there was no need to say who could make her personally wait at the door. Many people who had the same thoughts as the Sun family but were a step behind also waited at the door with Sun Furen. Yili always had a sense of time and did not like to have people wait for her outside for a long time. So not long after, the Prince Ding mansion's carriage came from the corner of the street. There were black cloud riders dressed in black from the front, back, left and right. The carriage in the middle of the black cloud riders was simple in appearance. Unlike the luxurious carriages of the imperial family and the royal family, the carriage stopped at the entrance to the flower garden. Sun Furen hurriedly led people forward and said with a smile, Huin Yang welcomes Wang Fei. Walking on the left side of the carriage, Qin Feng dismounted and lifted the curtain. The womenfolk all looked towards the carriage, wanting to see what Princess Ding looked like. They saw a white figure walk out of the carriage. White robes, white hair, cold and handsome. Who else could it be but Prince Ding? Prince Ding jumped off the carriage and then reached out with a hand. He said with a smile, Li, we're here. He reached out his hand to help Yi Li out of the carriage. Before Yi Li could jump off the carriage herself, he reached out his hand to lift Yi Li up by the waist and gently placed her on the ground. Seeing Mo Xiuyao, Mrs. Sun was also a little surprised. Because today's flower banquet was only for women, but when Prince Ding wanted to come, no one dared to stop him from entering. She went forward hesitantly, Your Highness Princess Consort, this. Mo Xiuyao waved his hand and calmly said, I am only sending Wang Fei over. I will soon enter the palace to meet the Emperor of Xiling. I will not disturb Sun Furen. Hearing this, Madame Sun secretly heaved a sigh of relief. One had to know that there were quite a number of nobles in West Hill who had some thoughts about Prince Ding. There were also quite a number of unmarried ladies who came to participate in the flower meet today. If Prince Ding was present, it would be troublesome. Mo Xiuyao did not look at anyone else. He lowered his head and said softly to Yi Li, Li, I will come and pick you up when I leave the palace. Yi Li nodded helplessly. She hadn't been sleeping well these past few days and her appetite wasn't good either. Mo Xiuyao treated her like a porcelain doll that would break at the slightest touch. Sighing softly, Yi Li reached out to straighten his collar and said, Be careful. I will wait for you. Hearing this, Mo Xiuyao could not help but smile. Li had not been in a good mood these days. She had not spoken to him in such a soft voice for many days. Was she better now? I know. Li also needs to be careful. I will go to the palace first. But he did not know that his smile had stirred the hearts of many young women present. Mo Xiuyao's features were elegant and handsome, but there was often a hint of indifference in his expression. But this smile came from his heart and did not have any falsehood. It made him appear even more handsome and moving. After giving some instructions to Yi Li and Qin Feng, who was following beside Yi Li, Mo Xiuyao pulled a horse and rode away with his people. On the side, Madame Sun covered her smile and said, Prince and Wang Fei are deeply in love. Many women in the world are envious. Yi Li smiled and said, Madam, you flatter me. Is this your daughter? Madame Sun was accompanied by a 7 or 8-year-old little girl dressed in brocade. Her appearance was 70 to 80% similar to Madame Sun, but she seemed more exquisite. A pair of large eyes stared curiously at Yi Li. When Yi Li looked at her, she hid behind Madame Sunday. Madame Sun pulled the little girl out from behind her and said with a smile, Isn't that so? This is my daughter Sun Xiaofu. Fu greet Wang Fei. The little girl looked curiously at Yi Li. She took a step forward and said crisply, Xiaofu greets Wang Fei. Yi Li happily stroked the little girl's hair and said with a smile, Good child, no need to be so courteous. Thinking, she took off a purple pearl pendant she always wore and handed it to Sun Xiaofu as a greeting gift. Sun Xiaofu looked timidly at her mother. Seeing Madame Sun nod, she took it and said thank you to Wang Fei. Seeing Princess Ding like this, the smile on Madame Sun's face became even more joyful. It was not easy for a widow like her to manage the family business. The value of what Princess Ding gave her was not important. What was important was that this imperceptibly expressed the attitude of the Prince Ding mansion. As expected, the noblewomen present looked at Madame Sun with more eagerness in their eyes. Even those who disdained her identity as a merchant and a widow began to think twice about it. Refreshments have been prepared inside. Wang Fei, please come in, Madame Sun said with a smile. Yi Li smiled faintly and said, Madam, please. The group of people followed Yi Li and Madame Sun into the flower park. It immediately became much quieter outside the door. There was a carriage parked on the side of the road not far from the gate. Sitting in the carriage was the Madame and daughter of the Bai family, Bai Qingning. When they arrived, they had seen the carriage of the Prince Ding mansion coming over. Naturally, they could only move to the side and let the carriage of the Prince Ding mansion pass first. Seeing her daughter in a daze, Madame Bai said worriedly. Bai Qingning looked up and asked, Was that Prince Ding just now? Madame Bai nodded and said, It is said that Prince Ding has a head of white hair. I think it is him. Bai Qingning nodded and sighed softly. I didn't expect Prince Ding to be so young. It is a pity that his white hair. If he did not have that head of white hair, how elegant would Prince Ding be when his hair was like clouds? In the flower park, Madame Sun walked with Yi Li. Although it was already early winter in Xiling, there were not many flowers in the garden. Even the most common flowers in Dechu State in autumn and winter were rarely seen in Xiling. However, the Sun family still decorated the flower park beautifully. Many places were decorated with silk flowers. It was one of the vibrant green trees and red flowers. Because the weather was already cold, the location of the banquet was moved from the garden to a water pavilion in the corner of the flower park. The water pavilion was hollow on all sides and covered only by thin muslin. People sat inside to drink and make merry, but they could clearly see the singing and dancing performances outside. Yi Li was naturally invited to the highest seat. While there were high officials and even princesses and commanderies among the noblewomen present, everyone knew that the imperial city had changed owners long ago. The beautiful woman in blue robes in front of them was the future owner of the imperial city. Therefore no one was unhappy about it. As the host and guests sat down, Yi Li looked around. While she did not recognize most of the people present, she could see some from their clothing. It seemed that Madame Sun's business methods were good. It had to be said that many of the people present were not people that merchants could invite. Everyone, do not pay attention to me. Today's gathering is fate. Everyone just drink and be merry. Seeing that everyone was a bit uneasy, Yi Li said with a smile. But while she said this, how could these noblewomen with their own thoughts not be restrained? Madame Sun said with a smile, Wang Fei is right. If there is anything that is lacking in hospitality, please forgive me. Everyone hurriedly exchanged pleasantries, and the atmosphere gradually became harmonious. Many people were secretly looking at Ding Wang Fei, who was sitting at the head seat, only to see that she didn't seem to be even 20 years old. Her features were picturesque, elegant and graceful. Her every move seemed to flow with a faint noble light that people were not willing to look at. Such elegance, she was like a beauty from an ancient painting. It was hard for people to think of the legendary heroine who could gallop on the battlefield. After some examination, many people who had planned to send their girls to the Prince Ding mansion became depressed. In terms of appearance, the women of West Hill were generally inferior to the women of the Dechu state. Also, Princess Ding was so beautiful, how could their girls have a chance to win Prince Ding's attention? Princess Lingyun has arrived. Madame Bai has arrived. Miss Bai has arrived. Someone announced loudly outside the water pavilion. Everyone hurriedly stood up. No matter when West Hill moved the capital, no matter what kind of thoughts they had, they were still the people of West Hill. So when they saw Princess Lingyun, there was no doubt that they had to greet her as a monarch. Princess Lingyun was still dressed in luxurious clothes. She walked quickly with a proud expression. Madame Bai, who was following behind her, did not look very good. Of course, they knew that the relationship between Princess Ding and Princess Lingyun was not good. Who knew that they would encounter Princess Lingyun after a delay outside, so they had to come in together. They only hoped that Princess Ding would not vent her anger on them because they came with Princess Lingyun. Greetings, Princess. Princess Lingyun snorted softly. She glanced at Yi Li, who was sitting and drinking tea, and then turned to Madame Sunday. She raised her chin and her sharp eyes were filled with cold anger. Obviously, she had not forgotten that she had been kicked out of the banquet a few days ago. Welcome, Princess. Please take a seat, Madame Sun said with a smile. Princess Lingyun sneered and said, I thought that Madame Sun was also going to kick me out today? Madame Sun smiled in surprise and said, How could it be? Who would dare to chase Princess Lingyun out of the door? Is she still alive? As soon as she said this, everyone present had a strange expression. A few young women could not help but secretly laugh. When Princess Lingyun came back from the Dechu state in disgrace, not only did she not restrain her temper, but she became more and more fierce. The Emperor of Xiling had no choice but to hastily arrange a marriage for her. Unexpectedly, Princess Lingyun might have been provoked in West Hill. In the first month of her marriage, she killed one of her husband's concubines and a little girl in her mother-in-law's courtyard. The reason why she killed the girl was that her husband's mother was so angry that she fell ill and did not want to see her. She ordered the girl not to let her in. Because of this, her husband's mother was so angry that she fainted on the spot. She passed away in less than 2 months. This also became a joke in the Emperor of Shiling's city. Princess Lingyun's face was distorted, but she did not lose her temper on the spot. She sneered and said, "In that case, wasn't it Madame Sun's order that I was blocked outside the door a few days ago? Or did Madame Sun want to see if I dare to take your life?" Madame Sun's expression changed slightly and said lightly, "I remember what Princess said. Princess must be clear about the banquet that day. It was a banquet held by the unmarried women in the city. Although there were a few madams who attended, they were all model women with good character to teach the young ladies etiquette and self-cultivation. Even I could not attend such a banquet in person. I don't know why, Princess." She only said half of this sentence, but it was even more embarrassing than finishing it. Princess Lingyun was already a married woman. She had neither talent nor virtue. Why should she attend such a banquet? Wasn't this asking the unmarried young ladies to follow her example? Chapter 697. Madame Sun's casual words caused Princess Lingyun's face to turn pale. However, Princess Lingyun was not an idiot despite her arrogance. She naturally understood that the Emperor of Shiling was no longer the same as before. Not only did she have to lower her head in front of Princess Ding Yili, but she could not easily flare up at this widow who had just joined the Prince Ding mansion. She could only snort and walk to a chair with a gloomy face to sit down. Everyone present was a little surprised that Princess Lingyun had swallowed her anger. After the surprise, they understood a little more. After all, the present was different from the past. Even someone as arrogant as Princess Lingyun did not dare to be presumptuous in front of Princess Ding. At the same time, she was even more determined to rely on the Prince Ding mansion. After Princess Lingyun sat down, Madame Bai brought Bai Qingning forward to greet Yili. "Madame Bai and my daughter Qingning greet Princess Ding." Bai Qingning followed behind Madame Bai and gracefully curtsied. "My daughter Qingning greets Princess Ding." This greeting was the formal greeting of a young lady from a scholarly family in Dechu State. It was not the slightest bit off and was quite different from the West Hill noble ladies who had come forward to greet her. Yili raised her eyebrows slightly and said with a smile, "Madame Bai, Miss Bai, no need to be so courteous. I'm also a guest. Please feel free to do as you please." Madame Bai smiled and said, "How would I dare? It is the blessing of 3 lifetimes to be able to see the princess consort's beauty today." While Madame Bai and Yili were exchanging greetings, Bai Qingning also took the opportunity to size up the green-clothed woman sitting at the head of the table. She didn't seem to be much older than him, but there was a hint of brilliance and majesty in her elegant and graceful appearance that made people unable to take their eyes off her. Instead, it added a sense of grace and nobility to her beautiful face, causing others to feel ashamed of their inferiority. What kind of person was Yili? Even if she was in the middle of a conversation, how could she not notice Bai Qingning's gaze on her? She couldn't help but smile. "Miss Bai, do you have something to say?" Yili smiled faintly. Bai Qingning was slightly taken aback. She hurriedly stood and said, "Qingning doesn't dare. It's just that I've heard that Wang Fei has galloped on the battlefield and your fame has spread far and wide. Qingning's heart yearns for it, that's why. Qingning is not behaving well. Please forgive me, Princess Consort." Yili waved her hand and smiled. "It's fine. What fame? It's just a rumor. I just followed the prince out of the capital and saw more of it." Bai Qingning's eyes were filled with envy and yearning. She smiled and said, "Wang Fei is too modest. If I could be as carefree as Wang Fei, then I would not have lived in vain." Sitting next to Yili, Sun Furen raised an eyebrow when she heard this. She hugged her daughter in her arms, a hint of an amused smile on her lips. The Bai family had taught their daughters to be empresses and concubines for generations. They had never heard of a daughter who yearned to be carefree. But seeing that Madame Bai was not offended, the smile in Sun Furen's eyes deepened. Yili lowered her head to sip tea, the smile on her face fading slightly. If this was a normal time, she would really like this woman. But in the past few days, her mood and even her view of people seemed to have been affected. Facing this smiling, elegant and cheerful woman in front of her, she did not have the slightest good impression of her. In reality, it was not that Yili did not know what the people present were thinking, but she did not care. Since she and Mo Xiuyao were in this kind of position, they could not avoid encountering this kind of problem. They were all doing it for their own benefit. She did not like them because of their own standpoints, but she did not feel that they were guilty. But it was a pity. If she and Mo Xiuyao did not have any feelings for each other, She would not mind being a virtuous consort in name. But they had experienced so many things and had such deep feelings. Then she could only say sorry to these people. Immerse was hers alone. The atmosphere in the water pavilion was slightly cold. Sitting at the side, Princess Lingyun snorted disdainfully. She came from the palace and was more domineering and scheming than normal people. How could she not know what the Bai family was planning? But it was a pity that Yili was not someone who was so easily manipulated. Princess Lingyun, who was almost 30 years old, had married a long time ago. The infatuation of the past had been worn away by time. What was left was not infatuation with Immerse, but unwillingness to accept Yili. Thus she knew what kind of person Yili was. Back then Yili, who had just married at the age of 14 or 15, dared to show no mercy to her, the Princess Ding of West Hill. Now that she had experienced many hardships and matured, how could she tolerate other women coveting what she owned? The Bai family's plan was destined to fail. The West Hill had not been destroyed yet, and these people were rushing to seek refuge with the Prince Ding mansion. They all deserved to die. After a while Yili said with a faint smile, "This is nothing. I have always felt that it is not a good thing for a girl to be locked up in the boudoir. If Miss Bai is interested, I can tell the Bai family head to let Miss Bai go out and gain experience. It is not a bad idea." Gain experience? Bai Qingning was startled. She did not understand why she was suddenly talking about this. And she did not really want to go out and gain experience. She was different from Princess Ding. Although she was a girl of West Hill, she did not have the strength to truss a chicken. How could she endure the hardships of the wind and frost? Yili said with a smile, "Isn't that so? I still remember. The first time I went out was to Nanjiang. I seemed to be around 15 or 16 years old. I am about the same age as Miss Bai." Bai Qingning could not maintain the smile on her face. She looked worriedly at Madame Bai, afraid that Yili would really throw her to Nanjiang. She had only read about Nanjiang in books. How could she go to a place with barren hills and unruly rivers? Madame Sun, who was watching the show, said with a smile, "Princess is right. What I regret most is that I have not been able to leave the Emperor of Shiling's city in this life. In the future, when Xiaofu is older, I will not restrict her like this." The other people also hurriedly praised Princess Ding's wisdom, but no one cared about it in their hearts. Although the West Hill was not as strict as the Dechu state in restricting their daughters, the young ladies were all pampered as they grew up. No one planned to throw their daughters out to suffer. However, many people secretly thought that Princess Ding was indeed extraordinary since she could travel to Nanjiang at the age of 15 or 16. They could not help but suppress the idea of sending their daughters to the Prince Ding mansion. Everyone sat and chatted with Yili for a while. After drinking some tea, they all got up and went to the garden in groups of 3 or 5. Yili naturally could not avoid the custom. Madame Sun and Madame Bai accompanied her to stroll in the garden. Looking at the colorful silk flowers on both sides of the road, Yili could not help but smile and say, "Madame is clever. No wonder the Sun family is becoming more and more prosperous in your hands." Madame Sun held Sun Xiaofu's hand and said with a smile, "West Hill is in the western region and the climate is cold. Not to mention the Dechu state, it is not even comparable to Li City. There are not many flowers and plants in the 4 seasons. Now it is like this because there is no other choice. I have embarrassed myself in front of Princess." Yili smiled faintly. Bai Qingning, who was following beside her, smiled and said, "Does Princess like flowers and plants? My residence has many flowers and plants from the Dechu state and the western region. Why don't I give them to Princess for you to see tomorrow?" Yili glanced sideways at Bai Qingning, who was smiling peacefully. She shook her head and said with a smile, "Taking what others like is not the conduct of a gentleman. Besides, I am not a refined person. It would be a waste to give them to me." Chapter 698. Bai Qingning covered her mouth and laughed. "Princess Consort is Mr. Qingyun's granddaughter. If Princess Consort is not a refined person, then we are vulgar." Madame Sun looked at Bai Qingning with a faint smile and said to Madame Bai, "Madame, your daughter really knows how to talk. If this was said to me, I would be so happy that I would be dizzy." The smile on Madame Bai's face froze and she said lightly, "Madame Sun is joking. How can a little girl like her compare to Madame Sun's glib tongue?" Madame Sun chuckled and said, "I am not joking. Who doesn't know that the Bai family's girls have never been glib? Otherwise, how could they be the emperor's concubine?" Madame Bai's face turned green and she glared at Madame Sunday. Madame Sun did not care and continued to hold her daughter's hand and talk with Yili as they walked. Princess Consort, fourth young master requests to see you. The guard behind her reported. Fourth brother. Yili was surprised. Today's banquet was for women and it was not suitable for men to enter. Even Emo Xiuyao had left after sending her to the door. But Yili also knew that if it was not something important, Su Qingbai would not have come to find her at this time. Madam Sun, is it convenient? Madam Sun thought and said with a smile, fourth young master is a good man. It is not inconvenient. Why don't Princess Consort wait for fourth young master at the pavilion in front? Yili nodded and said, okay. Not long after, Su Qingbai was led by the guard in a hurry. Li Ge, fourth brother, did something happen? Yili asked worriedly. Su Qingbai glanced at the women beside him and thought that it was not a secret. He said directly, my mother came to West Hill. What? Yili was stunned and did not understand what had happened. After a while she recovered and asked, First Aunt, why did First Aunt come to West Hill? Su Qingbai smiled bitterly and said in a low voice, I don't know how my mother found out that I was in West Hill some time ago. I just received a letter from Big Brother. Mother had already set off from Glass City half a month ago. She should be arriving soon. Yili composed herself and said, since Big Brother and Uncle both know about it, then eldest aunt's safety shouldn't be a problem. I'll send someone to pick up first aunt. Fourth brother, you don't have to worry. Su Qingbai smiled a little helplessly. Seeing Yili's puzzled expression, he told her frankly, I still have to stay in West Hill for a long time. At that time I'm afraid that mother. Li Er, please help me persuade mother. Yili finally understood. Previously, she and Emo Xiuyao had also discussed who would be in charge of the West Hill after they left. It seemed that Emo Xiuyao had already decided. Moreover, Su Qingbai had experience in governing a place and his achievements seemed to be very good. These few years in the northwest he had also managed the barren land in the north very well. It was indeed suitable for him to handle it. Yili finally understood why First Aunt had rushed over without any fear of danger. Fourth brother's stay in West Hill was not something that could be accomplished in a short period of time. Might even take 3 to 5 years. Now that fourth brother was not young anymore, if he did not return to Glass City for 3 to 5 years, First Aunt would be worried to death. Yili covered her mouth and laughed secretly. She nodded and said, Fourth brother, I understand. I'll talk to First Aunt properly. Su Qingbai heaved a sigh of relief and nodded, thank you, Li Er. After they finished talking about serious matters, Su Qingbai also relaxed. He nodded to Madame Sun and said, Qingbai has disturbed you. Please forgive me. Madame Sun smiled and said, Fourth young master, you're exaggerating. Madame Su, if there's anything I can help you with, fourth young master and princess consort, please speak your mind. Su Qingbai thought about it and indeed needed Madame Sun's help. He did not stand on ceremony and said with a smile, my mother may be staying in West Hill for a long time. It's not very appropriate for her to stay in the inn. Madame Sun understood and smiled, it seems that fourth young master will be in West Hill for a long time. Let the West Hill ladies. These days there are many houses in the city that want to be sold. I will keep an eye out for you. Although there were many noble families who wanted to rely on Princess Ding, there were also many people who wanted to follow the Emperor of Xiling to the south. Many houses in the imperial city had to be sold. Su Qingbai cupped his hands and smiled, in that case I'll have to trouble you, madam. Using the excuse that Madame Su was coming, Yili sat for a while and then got up to leave with Su Qingbai. Originally, with her identity, she did not have to attend this banquet from the beginning to the end. Showing her face and exchanging a few words with these noble ladies was already polite enough. Moreover, she felt a little uncomfortable after sending them off for a while. Madame Sun did not dare to stay for long and also got up to send them out. When they reached the door, Yili turned back and said, Madam, I won't send you off anymore. Please stay. Madame Sun did not stand on ceremony. She nodded and smiled, in that case, princess, take care. Goodbye. Yili nodded and turned to walk to the carriage. Princess, be careful. A silver light flashed in the sunlight. Yili reflexively avoided it. An arrow shot past her and nailed into the carriage beside her. The guards around immediately protected Yili and Su Qingbai in the middle. A group of men dressed in different clothes but covered their faces jumped down from the roofs of various street corners and rushed in the direction of Yili. The guards of the Prince Ding mansion did not hesitate to meet them head-on. The two sides soon fell into a group of fighting. Yili was protected in the middle. She could see clearly that although these people dressed in different colors, their skills were not bad. They had obviously been trained. But for a while she could not think of anyone in the Emperor of Xiling City who would have such an elite force and wanted to assassinate her except for the Emperor of Xiling. These people came suddenly. The noble ladies who stood at the door and did not have time to enter suffered. Although they did not come for them, it was inevitable that there would be fish caught in the crossfire. A maidservant was stabbed to death by a sword and fell right in front of Madame Sunday. Madame Sun was so scared that her face turned pale, but she still held her frightened and screaming daughter tightly and retreated to a corner. She shouted, "Hurry up and capture the assassin." This banquet was a gathering of the powerful women in the city. Naturally, it was impossible for there to be no guards to protect them. However, these guards were obviously not the assassin's opponents. They suffered heavy casualties as soon as they fought. A guard's face was slashed by a saber and he fell toward the door. He landed right next to Bai Qingning. No matter how calm Bai Qingning was, she was still a 16 or 17-year-old girl. She screamed in fright, her voice even higher than Sun Xiaofu's. An assassin not far from her heard her scream and turned around to shoot a willow leaf dart. Bai Qingning's eyes widened, but she could not move her body. She could only close her eyes and wait for death. Ding! There was a clear sound of impact. The willow leaf dart that should have been nailed into her body fell to the ground. There was also a red hairpin that was broken in two. Bai Qingning clearly remembered that it was the red hairpin that Princess Ding had worn. She quickly looked in the direction of Yili. She saw Yili and Su Qingbai were protected by people by the carriage. Although the surroundings were chaotic, the two were still clean. She didn't know where she got the courage, but Bai Qingning rushed in the direction of Yili. Perhaps she was lucky that her life was not meant to end. She actually managed to rush in front of Yili and Su Qingbai. Wang Fei. Chapter 699. Seeing that she was quite frightened and that she was already here, she couldn't just throw her out. Yili motioned for the guards to let her come over. Walking in front of Yili and Su Qingbai, Bai Qingning finally gave a sigh of relief. She said in a trembling voice, "Wang Fei. These people," Yili said faintly, "don't be afraid. It'll be fine soon." Seeing Yili's calm appearance, Bai Qingning wanted to say something else, but she could only close her mouth. She could only look at everything in front of her in terror, her eyes filled with fear. These assassins did not seem to fear death and did not pay attention to the people around them. They only charged towards Yili with all their might, looking like they would not stop until they reached their goal. There were many guards in the Prince Ding mansion, but there were even more assassins. These assassins clearly knew that they did not have much time, so their attacks were even more ruthless. There were even a few people who used their lives to hold back one of the Prince Ding mansion guards so that their companions could charge forward. If this was any other time, Yili would praise these people for their bravery, but the situation right now was very unfavorable for them. Finally, someone broke through the guards and charged towards Yili. Yili pushed Su Qingbai aside and said, "Fourth brother, leave quickly." Su Qingbai knew that he did not know martial arts. If he stayed, he would only be a burden to Yili. He nodded and said, "Li-er, you have to be careful." Yili nodded and moved her head to dodge the assassin's sword. There was a flash of silver in her sleeve and a flash of blood. The hand holding the long sword fell to the ground. The pungent smell of blood caused Yili to frown in discomfort. She did not show any mercy as the dagger flew towards the assassin's heart, instantly killing both the assassin and her subordinate. A guard pulled Su Qingbai out, and Bai Qingning, who was beside him, quickly rushed forward. Young Master Su, take me with you." The blood of the assassin who had his hand chopped off by Yili and then stabbed to death had spilled all over her body. She was already filled with fear, unable to bear it. Seeing Su Qingbai leave, she hurriedly grabbed onto him. Su Qingbai frowned slightly and could only pull her up. However, these assassins clearly knew Su Qingbai's identity. They quickly surrounded him and forced him in the direction of Yili. The guards had to protect Su Qingbai and deal with the assassins at the same time. Gradually, they found themselves in dire straits and in danger again and again. Su Qingbai said in a deep voice, "Life and death are predestined. You don't have to care about us. Just focus on the enemy." The bodyguard beside him also understood that if he died, Su Qingbai, who did not know martial arts, would also die. Gradually, Su Qingbai and Bai Qingning were forced back to Yi Li by the assassins. Yi Li brandished the long sword she had snatched from the assassin's hands. She knocked one of the assassins aside with a frown and asked, "Why haven't you left yet? Qin Feng, take fourth brother away first." Qin Feng was currently surrounded by several assassins. Even though he heard Yi Li's orders, he was unable to break free in a short time. Su Qingbai pulled Bai Qingning, who was clinging onto his clothes, back to the side. He did his best to maintain a distance from Yi Li. He said helplessly with a wry smile, "Li Er, it seems like I've implicated you." Yi Li's long sword was like the wind as she smiled faintly and said, "Fourth brother, what nonsense are you saying? Aren't I the one who's implicated you?" Yi Li's swordsmanship had been personally taught by Mo Xiuyao. Even though it could not be considered perfect, it was still very good. For a moment, the assassins could not do anything to her. However, Yi Li gradually frowned slightly. Her abdomen was a little painful and fine beads of sweat gradually appeared by her ears. Originally, Yi Li's strength should not be so weak, but at this moment she did not have the time to care about the reason. When the assassins detected that Yi Li's movements had slowed, they were naturally overjoyed. The few of them pounced on Yi Li. They were here for Yi Li's life. As long as they could kill Yi Li, they would be able to destroy half of the Prince Ding mansion and even Prince Ding. Even if all of them did not return, it was still worth it. Yi Li calmed herself down and swung her sword, causing a bloody light to appear. However, the pain in her abdomen made her feel extremely weak. She even felt cold. "Princess." Qin Feng broke free from the assassins and also detected Yi Li's discomfort. He hurriedly flew over and reached out to support Yi Li. Yi Li grabbed his shoulder and said, "Take fourth brother out first." Qin Feng frowned and said in a deep voice, "No, this subordinate will take Princess out first." Even though he did not know where Princess was injured, but he could see that Princess was in great discomfort. Not far away, Bai Qingning rushed over in panic and shouted, "Take me away. I beg you, take me away." Qin Feng impatiently raised his hand to slap her, but he heard a strong gust of wind. "Yi Li, give me your life." 3 shining long swords stabbed at Yi Li. Qin Feng swung his sword to block 2 of the swords in front of Yi Li. The other sword couldn't help but sway towards Bai Qingning. Bai Qingning screamed and reached out to pull at the person next to her, but she just happened to grab onto Yi Li's clothes. Yi Li was already in great discomfort and couldn't stand steadily. She was completely relying on Qin Feng to support her. With this pull, she was sent under the blades. "Princess." Li Er. Yi Li managed to raise her hand, and the dagger in her hand dissipated the power of the sword. Her entire body left Qin Feng's support and fell onto Bai Qingning's body. When the assassin's sword missed, a second sword immediately followed. "Princess." Qin Feng was entangled and it was too late to help. He could only throw the long sword in his hand at that person, but it was too late. That person's long sword was already stabbing towards Yi Li. Bai Qingning's face was pale and she quickly let go. Just as the tip of the sword was about to pierce Yi Li's body, a jade-colored figure rushed over and blocked in front of Yi Li. With a splash, warm blood landed on Yi Li's face. Yi Li's eyes widened. "See, fourth brother." Chapter 700. Yi Li looked dazedly at Su Qingbai, who was blocking in front of her. A long sword came from behind her. Blood flowed down the tip of the sword and onto Yi Li's clothes. Drops of blood fell onto her jade-like face. "Li Su Qingbai grimaced helplessly. The sharp pain that came clearly caused his body to involuntarily convulse. Qin Feng, who was behind him, finally pulled his hand out. But when he saw the scene in front of him that made his heart tremble in fear, he casually dodged the long sword in the hand of a person beside him and swung it at that person. The assassin who had wanted to pull out his sword and give another blow was instantly cut in 2 by Qin Feng's sharp sword energy. Wang Fei. Fourth young master. Seeing that something had happened here, the other guards all gathered over. Actually, this was also their mistake. Everyone had seen Wang Fei's skills, so most of their attention had been placed on killing the enemy. They hadn't thought that Wang Fei would have an accident. At this time, the guards had gathered and narrowed the encirclement. Even though there was no benefit to killing these assassins, it made it difficult for these assassins to charge through. Qin Feng scanned the surroundings before going forward to ask, "Wang Fei, you Yili bit her lips and said in a low voice, "I'm fine. How is Forthy?" Qin Feng also saw that the assassin had not injured Wang Fei. Most of the blood on Wang Fei's body was Su Qingbai's, and Su Qingbai had sunk into a semi-unconscious state. Calming himself, Qin Feng carefully inspected Su Qingbai's wounds. Only then did he release a breath. He tapped a few acupuncture points on Su Qingbai's body and said, "It didn't hit any vital parts, but fourth young master is bleeding too much. You need to quickly stop the bleeding and bandage it, otherwise." But they were surrounded by assassins and had no way of charging out. "This subordinate has already released the signal. The guards in the city will quickly arrive." Seeing Yi Li's pale face, Qin Feng said in a low voice. Yi Li nodded. She carefully supported Su Qingbai so that his wound wouldn't bleed again. The guards of the Prince Ding mansion in the city were not satisfied. Soon a large group of people arrived. The leaders were Feng Zhiyao and Su Qingfeng. Su Qingfeng charged into the encirclement. When he saw Su Qingbai covered in blood, his eyes turned red. "Fourth brother. Liu. Princess consort, fourth young master." Feng Zhiyao, who had followed closely behind, also felt his heart tighten. Seeing that Yi Li was safe and sound, he calmed down slightly. Originally, he and Su Qingfeng had nothing to do and were resting in the relay station. However, they did not expect to see Qin Feng's signal. They hurriedly brought their men and horses to the scene, but it was already a bloody mess. Feng Zhiyao's eyes flashed coldly. "Kill. Just leave two of them alive." Seeing Feng Zhiyao and Su Qingfeng, Yi Li also let out a breath. She felt her vision darken. She grabbed Su Qingfeng with one hand and said, "Third brother, send fourth brother to the medical hall. Go quickly." Su Qingfeng nodded with a heavy face. "I know." He bent down to pick up Su Qingbai. Carefully avoiding the sword on his body, he stood up and walked out under the protection of several guards. Yi Li also stood up with the support of Feng Zhiyao and Qin Feng. However, when her body that had been seriously uncomfortable relaxed, she felt even colder. Her vision darkened and she fell to the ground. "Princess consort?" Yi Li. A cold shout came from the corner of the street. In the middle of the street, a fine horse was quickly galloping over. Immediately, a white-clothed figure appeared out of thin air. A sword energy flashed through the air. The assassins closest to Yi Li were all wounded by the sword energy. Bloody wounds appeared on their chests as they fell to the ground. Emo Shuyao landed on the ground. His face was dark as he took Yi Li from Feng Zhiyao's hands. He said anxiously, "Li Li. Yi Li." As he reached out to feel Yi Li's pulse, his hand, which had never trembled while holding the bloodthirsty sword, was trembling slightly. He couldn't even feel her pulse. Due to this, his handsome face couldn't help but show an anxious and gloomy expression. There was a hint of savagery between his brows. Feng Zhiyao saw that something was wrong and hurriedly said, Princess consort isn't injured. She just fainted." In reality, there was no need to feel her pulse to see that Yi Li's breathing was steady. However, Emo Shuyao's concern had caused him to panic and he couldn't understand it all. Emo Shuyao paused. He seemed to have finally calmed down and a thread of clarity flashed through his eyes. Only then did he take Yi Li's pulse again. Even though he didn't understand as a martial artist, he could feel the basic meridians. Feeling that Yi Li's pulse was steady and that she hadn't suffered any internal or external injuries, his expression eased slightly. Feng Zhiyao added, "This subordinate has already ordered people to bring a doctor over. Prince, why don't you first settle Princess consort down?" "Prince, there are only places to rest in the flower park. Why don't you send Princess consort there temporarily?" Sun Furen walked over and said with a pale face. "Something like this had happened here today. It would be fine if nothing happened to Princess consort. If something happened, no matter if it was related to the Sun family or not, the Sun family would not be able to escape responsibility. So even though Sun Furen's legs were weak from fright, she had to come over and speak." Emo Shuyao picked up Yi Li and glanced coolly at Sun Furen before walking into the flower park. The doctor didn't come slowly. Emo Shuyao had just been taken by Sun Furen to a small building in the flower park to settle Yi Li down when Qin Feng and Feng Zhiyao each came in with a doctor. These two doctors were not doctors from the Mahist army in the Prince Ding mansion. They were doctors that the guards had brought over from the nearby medical hall after receiving Emo Shuyao's orders. The two of them were also frightened when they were suddenly held hostage. When they saw the white-haired Emo Xiuyao sitting by the bed with a dark expression, their legs couldn't help but collapse to the ground. Sun Furen hurriedly pulled the two up and said, "Doctors, please take Princess Consort's pulse." Reminded by her, the two doctors finally came back to their senses. Their limbs were weak as they walked towards the bed. But when they saw Emo Xiuyao sitting by the bed, they didn't dare to go close. Emo Xiuyao snorted softly. He examined the two doctors for a moment before standing and giving way to the bed. These two doctors were not important people, but there were all kinds of people in a place like the medical hall. Naturally, they did not lack information. At this time they guessed which Wang Fei was the woman lying on the bed. Facing Emo Xiuyao, who was glaring at them, Emo Xiuyao couldn't help but be more cautious. They took turns to take Yi Li's pulse. They looked at each other to exchange their diagnosis. Emo Xiuyao, who was standing behind them, did not have such patience. He asked in a deep voice, "How is Li?" One of the doctors frowned and took the pulse again. After confirming it, he and his companion raised their hands towards Emo Xiuyao and said, "Prince, please do not worry. Princess Consort is fine." Emo Xiuyao's expression did not change for the better. He asked in a deep voice, "I am asking why Princess Consort is unconscious." The old man trembled in fright and hurriedly said, Princess Consort is almost 3 months pregnant. The reason why she's still in a coma is probably because the little prince in her womb was frightened just now. Chapter 701. What did you say? Everyone was shocked. Emo Xiuyao grabbed the doctor's collar and asked. The doctor was so frightened that he couldn't speak. The doctor at the side quickly said, "Prince, the Wang Fei is indeed pregnant. Other than that, she hasn't suffered any injuries." In the room, Feng Jiao, Qin Feng, and Madame Sun all let out a breath of relief. Their hearts were filled with joy. Feng Jiao went forward to save the poor doctor who was about to be choked by Emo Xiuyao. He said to Emo Xiuyao, "Prince, congratulations to Prince. The Prince Ding mansion will have another little heir." Emo Xiuyao finally came back to his senses. He walked to the bedside and sat down. He stared dazedly at the person sleeping on the bed. Feng Jiao shrugged helplessly. He turned to communicate with the doctor. "Is Wang Fei really all right? When will she wake up?" The doctor said in a low voice, "Wang Fei has suffered a great shock. The main reason is that the little heir's fetus is weak. She may have suffered a shock. Wang Fei fell into a deep sleep to protect the little heir. This commoner will prescribe some medicine to stabilize the fetus and calm the nerves for Wang Fei to take. Wang Fei will definitely wake up in 2 or 3 days at most." Feng Jiao looked solemnly at the two doctors and asked, "Are you sure?" The two doctors nodded helplessly with bitter expressions. "This commoner guarantees that Wang Fei is really fine. Speaking of which, Wang Fei's health is very good. Otherwise, with today's incident, a normal woman would have a hard time keeping her child. Wang Fei's fetus has only been slightly affected. It won't be a problem." Feng Jiao nodded in satisfaction and said, "That's good. I'll have to trouble the two of you to stay at the Prince Ding mansion to take care of Wang Fei. Of course, the Prince Ding mansion will give you a satisfactory consultation fee." The two physicians also knew that they didn't have any leeway to refuse, so they could only nod and agree. Feng Jiao sent people to take them to write prescriptions to decoct the medicine. After giving Yi Li the medicine and settling her down, although she was still in a deep sleep, Yi Li's complexion had clearly improved. Emo Xiuyao's gloomy expression also slightly warmed up. When Feng Jiao came to report that all the assassins had been taken down, Emo Xiuyao carefully tucked Yi Li in, stood up and walked out. In the outer hall, Mrs. Sun was still waiting there, not daring to leave. Seeing Emo Xiuyao come out, Mrs. Sun stepped forward and knelt on the ground, saying in a deep voice, "Sun Yusher asks Prince to punish me." Emo Xiuyao snorted softly and said indifferently, "Tell I where those assassins came from within 2 hours. If you can't." Without waiting for Emo Xiuyao to finish speaking, Mrs. Sun hurriedly said, "Thank you, Prince, for your mercy. This subordinate understands." She bowed to Emo Xiuyao, then hurriedly turned and left. Emo Xiuyao walked out of the door and glanced at Qin Feng, Zhuo Jing and Lin Han, who were standing at the door. He said in a deep voice, "I will deal with you when Li wakes up. If anything happens to Li." Qin Feng said solemnly, "This subordinate understands." Emo Xiuyao snorted coldly and left in a huff. Zhuo Jing and Lin Han, who were standing beside him, sighed. Jing reached out and patted Qin Feng's shoulder as a form of consolation. Then he and Lin Han quickly followed Emo Xiao. At this time, although there were many people in the Sun family's garden, the atmosphere was so solemn that it was frightening. The noble ladies and young ladies who had come to attend this gathering were all detained in the open space by the water pavilion outside the garden. It was September and the Emperor of Shiling's city was already a bit cold, but these noble ladies and young ladies stood in the cold wind for more than 2 hours in front of the expressionless Mahist army soldiers, and no one dared to make a sound. Bai Qingming sat down beside Mrs. Bai in a daze. Mrs. Bai had also been standing at the outermost area and was also quite frightened. The mother and daughter pair, one standing and one sitting, were inconspicuous in the crowd because the others were not much better than them. Not to mention, there were a few assassins who had been caught by the guards of the Prince Ding mansion not far away. After taking off their masks, there were actually some familiar faces among them. Those who were sensitive to current affairs could clearly feel that a storm was coming. "Greetings, Prince." As the guards of the Prince Ding mansion saluted respectfully, Emo Xiaoyao strode over in a white robe. His snow-white hair fluttered in the breeze and for some reason he made people feel a biting cold. Emo Xiaoyao did not look at the frightened ladies, but looked at the assassins who had been pressed to the ground. He lowered his eyes and asked, "Who are they?" Feng Jiao said in a low voice, "Prince, we have investigated thoroughly. They have different identities. This one is a guard of the West Hill Imperial Army, and the other is a minor official of the Ministry of War. They are all from the old noble families of West Hill." "Very good." Emo Xiaoyao laughed in a low voice. He lowered his head to look at the young man on the ground who had his leg broken but was still glaring at him with resentment. Squatting down, Emo Xiaoyao lifted the young man's face with one hand and smiled faintly. "The West Hill family? You really have guts. Emo Xiaoyao, don't even think about taking over the city of the Emperor of Shiling. Genom of Gojoseon will come back." The young man scolded angrily. Emo Xiaoyao was not angry. "Enchanting? What a pity. In Enchanting's eyes, the city of the Emperor of Shiling is not that important. But don't worry, I can fulfill your wish. In the future, I will definitely scatter Enchanting's ashes in the streets of the city of the Emperor of Shiling for people to trample on. As for now, you should worry about yourselves." After he finished speaking, there was a cracking sound. The young man's face twisted and his sternum strangely caved in. He began to spit blood from his lips. "Emo Xiaoyao, you will die a horrible death. You and Yili are both." Before he could finish his sentence, the young man's body suddenly flew backward over the crowd and directly hit the wall in the distance. There was a heavy thud and the wall was already stained with dark red blood. The young man's body slid to the ground, limp and lifeless. "You don't know what's good for you." The flower park was instantly silent. Everyone looked at the white-haired man standing in front of them in fear. It was as if the person standing in front of them was not a handsome prince whose name shook the world, but an evil Azura who had come out of hell. Emo Xiaoyao did not look at the corpse in the corner. He lowered his head to look at the other assassin and smiled faintly. "Royal guards? The Emperor of Shiling asked you to assassinate Isley?" After being frightened, even the royal guards, who were known as the elites of the West Hill, could not help but feel a chill. "It was my own idea. It has nothing to do with anyone else. If you want to kill me, do whatever you want." The royal guards gritted his teeth and suppressed the chill in his heart. Emo Xiaoyao nodded. "Very good, you have a backbone. I will fulfill your wish. Execute your whole family." Hearing this, the man's eyes suddenly widened. "No, you can't." "Then I'll let you tell me whether I can or not." Emo Xiaoyao smiled calmly. "Feng-san, did you bring them here?" Feng Jiao, who was standing to the side, looked at Emo Xiaoyao, who was talking and laughing calmly. He sighed in his heart, hid the worry in his eyes and nodded. "Prince, all the assassins of the 3 clans whose identities have been found are waiting outside the door to be dealt with." Emo Xiaoyao said calmly, "Kill them." Chapter 702. "No. Prince Ding, you can't do this." In the crowd, Princess Lingyun stepped forward and stared at Emo Xiaoyao. Emo Xiaoyao curled his lips in disdain and said lightly, "I don't need you to tell I what to do." Princess Lingyun said sternly, "They are the officials of West Hill. Your Prince Ding mansion has no right to punish them." Feng Jiao stepped forward and stopped Princess Lingyun. He smiled faintly and said, "They are the assassins who tried to assassinate Princess Ding. The Prince Ding mansion has the right to decide how to punish them." Princess Lingyun could not help but choke and argued, "But their clansmen are innocent." Feng Zhiyao sneered and looked at Princess Lingyun with interest. "Assassinating Ding Wangfei, it is not too much to say that the 9 familial extermination is a great crime, right? Moreover, the Prince Ding mansion is only implicating 3 clans. This is considered to be giving face to the Emperor of Xiling." Princess Lingyun's face turned ugly. These assassins were not of high status and could even be said to be inconspicuous. However, their families were all prominent in West Hill and most of them followed Jinan Palace. Moreover, the marriage alliances between the nobles were always between these families. If the 3 clans were implicated, at least half of the nobles in the Emperor of Xiling's city would be killed or injured. The power of Jinan Palace could be said to be completely destroyed. Compared to her disappointing and weak father, Princess Lingyun had always respected her capable uncle Enchanting. She had a good relationship with Jinan Palace. Naturally, she did not want Enchanting's power in the imperial city to be completely destroyed by Mo Xiaoyao. "Even if that's the case, we should report this matter to my imperial father before dealing with it," said Princess Lingyun. Feng Zhiyao sneered and said, "The Emperor of Xiling City is now the Prince Ding mansion. Your Emperor of Xiling clan is only temporarily living here. Since when does the host need to consult the guest on how to do things?" "You're shameless." Princess Lingyun was speechless and could only curse. Feng Zhiyao rolled his eyes speechlessly. Just as he was about to open his mouth to rebuke Princess Lingyun, a white figure flashed past like a gust of wind. The arrogant Princess Lingyun had already been grabbed by the neck and her eyes rolled back. Mo Xiaoyao looked down from above and stared coldly at the exquisitely made-up woman in front of him. His voice was as cold as the wind. "Since when did you have the right to interfere in I's business? Do you think you'll be fine just because you're the Princess of Xiling?" With Mo Xiaoyao choking Princess Lingyun, she almost couldn't breathe. With difficulty she said, I don't care. Mo Xiaoyao didn't show any mercy. Princess Lingyun used all her strength but couldn't utter a complete sentence. She could only watch helplessly as her breathing became more and more difficult. Her heart was in so much pain that it felt like it was going to explode. "How many of these people were brought here by you?" Mo Xiaoyao asked. Princess Lingyun's expression changed and her eyes were filled with fear. She fearfully looked at Mo Xiaoyao's smiling face and saw the undisguised murderous intent in his deep eyes. "No." This was Princess Lingyun's last word. Under everyone's gaze, Princess Lingyun, who had been arguing loudly just a moment ago, silently slid to the ground, blood seeping out of her lips. Someone finally couldn't stand the horrifying scene in front of them and screamed. Instantly the flower garden became noisy. The women present all knelt on the ground and begged for mercy. Even someone like Princess Lingyun was killed by Prince Ding without hesitation, let alone them. "Shut up." Feng Zhiyao looked at Mo Xiaoyao, who was clearly getting impatient amidst the noisy crying. He hurriedly shouted. With his shout, the crying stopped abruptly. Mo Xiaoyao walked to a chair that had been placed not far away and sat down. His gaze slowly fell on the mother and daughter of the Bai family who were huddled in the crowd. When Bai Qingning felt Mo Xiaoyao's gaze fall on her, she couldn't help but shiver. She did her best to lean against Madame Bai. After what happened just now, she didn't have the slightest bit of ambition or status as Prince Ding in her heart. Right now, in her heart, Prince Ding was clearly much more terrifying than the evil spirits of the underworld. If she could leave this place immediately, she only hoped that she would never see this person again in her life. "Bai Qingning?" Mo Xiaoyao calmly called out. There wasn't a trace of joy or anger in his voice. The scene was chaotic just now, so Madame Bai didn't see what Bai Qingning had done. Although she was extremely afraid of Mo Xiaoyao, she only thought that Prince Ding had taken a liking to her daughter and hurriedly reached out to push Bai Qingning. Bai Qingning's body trembled. She repeatedly shook her head and hid next to Madame Bai, not daring to move. Feng Zhiyao, who was standing next to Mo Xiaoyao, waved his hand to the side. 2 guards came forward and easily brought Bai Qingning in front of Mo Xiaoyao. Mo Xiaoyao carefully sized up Bai Qingning. After a while he calmly said, "Not bad looking." It was clearly a compliment, but in Bai Qingning's ears, it was like a death sentence. Thinking about how Imo Xiuyao had praised the two assassins for being very good and having backbone, Bai Qingming's face became even paler. Trembling as she knelt on the ground, Bai Qingming suppressed her fear and said, "Prince. Thank you, Prince, for the compliment." Imo Xiuyao coldly laughed, "I didn't praise you. My beloved concubine is unconscious because of you. How dare you?" "No." Bai Qingming involuntarily cried out, "It has nothing to do with me. I didn't do anything." She really didn't do anything. Yes, she had helped Yi Li, but that was an accident. The person she wanted to help wasn't Yi Li. Moreover, she just wanted to live. In that kind of situation, she didn't even have the strength to truss a chicken. Was it wrong to want to live? "You didn't do anything?" Imo Xiuyao stared at her. Bai Qingming repeatedly nodded and said, "That's right, it has nothing to do with me. I didn't do anything." "You didn't do anything. You still deserve to die." Imo Xiuyao's eyes were filled with viciousness. He stared at Bai Qingming with disgust and even hatred. His voice was gentle. "You were Bai Li's side. Why didn't you block for her?" Bai Qingming was speechless. So in Prince Ding's eyes, not blocking for Princess Ding was one of the reasons she deserved to die? No. Bai Qingming repeatedly shook her head. A wave of unreconciled anger rose in her heart. Why did she deserve to die just because she didn't block for Princess Ding? Why should she, a weak and powerless woman, block a sword for a person who was completely unrelated to her, who was skilled in martial arts? She just wanted to live. Was that wrong? No. I don't accept this. Bai Qingming sharply shouted. Chapter 703. Not convinced. Imo Xiuyao seemed to have heard a joke. He looked at Bai Qingming's beautiful face contorted with anger and unwillingness. "What right do you have to say that to I? You caused Li Li to be injured, all of you deserve to die." His voice was very low and the noble women not far away did not hear him. But when it fell into Bai Qingming's ears, it was like a deafening drum. In that moment Bai Qingming even thought that she saw Imo Xiuyao's eyes flashing with a red light, as if he was a demon of the world. She couldn't help but scream. Not far away, Madame Bai saw this scene and understood that things were not as good as she thought. She hurriedly stumbled over, "Prince, my daughter." Seeing that Imo Xiuyao had no intention of opening his mouth, Feng Jiao faintly opened his mouth to explain. Miss Bai caused Wang Fei to fall into a coma from fright and fourth young master to be heavily injured. This way it could not be considered as wronging Bai Qingming. If she had not been in the way, the guards would have already sent Su Qingbai away and would not have lost sight of one thing and the other. In the end, both of them were almost injured. "Well, what?" Madame Bai was shocked and said in a trembling voice. She did not dare to believe that her daughter, who had always been obedient and intelligent, would cause such a disaster in such a short period of time. Bai Qingming also understood that this was a matter of life and death. She hurriedly grabbed Madame Bai and said, "Mother, I am innocent. I did not harm the Prince Ding mansion and fourth young master Su. I am innocent. Prince." Madame Bai swallowed with difficulty and said in a trembling voice, "Prince, this is most likely a misunderstanding. My daughter would not do such a thing. Please, Prince, for the sake of the Bai family's loyalty, investigate this matter thoroughly." Imo Xiuyao, who had been resting with his eyes closed, suddenly opened his eyes. His gaze swept over Madame Bai like a knife. He asked, "Madame Bai is threatening I? This concubine doesn't dare. Prince, please understand." Madame Bai was so scared that she fell to the ground and didn't dare to say another word. Imo Xiuyao glanced coldly at Bai Qingming. "Take her away. I don't want to see her again." Feng Jiao sighed in his heart. Actually, Bai Qingming's crime did not warrant death. She could only blame her own bad luck. He waved his hand and ordered his men to drag her away. Bai Qingming kept struggling, but how could she compare to the strength of two grown men? She was dragged out without hesitation, and only Bai Qingming's shrill cries could be heard from afar. "No, I don't want to die. Mother, save me, I don't want to die." The mournful screams that came with the wind gradually stopped. The faces of the noble ladies in the flower garden were indeed pale as they shivered in the cold wind. Madame Bai stared blankly in the direction where her daughter disappeared. Finally, she could not help but burst into tears. She only had this one daughter in her entire life, and she had high hopes for her since she was young. Bai Qingning did not fail to live up to her expectations, but now she had been killed by Prince Ding. How could she accept this? 2 guards came over, one on the left and one on the right, and carried Madame Bai out. The prince was in a bad mood. If she continued to cry here, it was very likely that the prince's mood would become even worse. At that time, it would not be just these people who would suffer. Prince. Madame's son hurried over with a booklet. When she saw the corpses on the ground, her face only changed color. She walked over to Emo Xiaoyao without blinking and said in a low voice, "The thing the prince wants is here." Feng Jiao couldn't help but look at the woman in front of him with praise. As a woman in the boudoir, she was not as good as Princess Ding on the battlefield of the imperial court. However, to have this kind of courage and composure was already extraordinary. Emo Xiaoyao took the booklet and flipped through it. His expression became even more gloomy. After a while, he closed the booklet with a snap and threw it into Lin Han's arms behind him. He said, "Bring everything according to the booklet to I." Lin Han caught the booklet and stuffed it into his arms without even looking. He said loudly, "This subordinate obeys." Then he turned and disappeared from the garden like the wind. This day, the most bloody scene in the West Hill in the past 50 to 60 years played out in the city of the Emperor Xiling. Even when Genom of Gojoseon seized power and suppressed the ministers of the imperial court, there had not been such a tragic scene. Outside the gates of the Sun family's garden, almost all the noble families in the imperial city, regardless of age or gender, were pulled out of the garden. The entire intersection was filled with people. 1/3 of the clans in the imperial city were executed on the streets outside the flower garden. Such an important matter naturally alarmed the Emperor Xiling, and he hurried out of the palace. Unfortunately, even the Emperor Xiling himself could not save these people's lives. The streets outside the Sun family's garden were filled with blood. The entire street was almost dyed with dark red blood. This day, a duke, a princess, 2 marquises, 4 officials of the 3rd rank and above, 12 officials of the 5th rank and above, and countless officials of the 5th rank and below were killed in West Hill. And all of this was only because Princess Ding was assassinated. For a moment the world was horrified. The records of West Hill. Last Emperor's Yearbook. In September, Princess Ding was assassinated in the imperial city. The king was furious. The imperial city was bathed in blood. It was called the Blood Calamity of the Sun family's garden. Records of Chu. Prince Ding's records. King Ding Huan's chapter. In September, the princess and the Emperor Xiling were assassinated in West Hill. The king was furious. He killed more than 100 people related to King Nan. 3 out of 10 nobles in the imperial city were killed. The world was shocked. For example, the unofficial history of Princess Ding Huan's biography. Prince Ding killed more than half of the nobles in West Hill for Princess Ding. The Emperor Xiling's city was bathed in blood and the souls of the dead were wailing. Prince Ding and Princess Ding's relationship could move the heavens. But his iron fist and killing countless people was all because of his concubine. Lady Yi could be called a femme fatale. Regardless of how this bloody storm smeared Prince Ding's reputation, there were many nobles who were forced to watch the execution who were scared out of their wits. There were even rumors that some of the more timid ones were so scared that they fell ill when they returned. Some of them even died a few days later. But none of this affected Emo Xiaoyao at all. Ever since Yi Li had fainted, Prince Ding's face had not shown any expression that could be called gentle. Even when he smiled, people couldn't help but shudder. Even the news that Yi Li was pregnant did not make Emo Xiaoyao feel any joy. Every time he inadvertently saw Emo Xiaoyao's dark eyes stare at Wang Fei's still flat stomach, Feng Jiao couldn't help but feel a wave of fear. But thinking about it, the prince had also disliked the little Shitzi in the past. Hadn't the little Shitzi bounced around and grown up? Now could he still go against the prince? Prince. In a quiet and elegant room, Yi Li was lying quietly on the bed, fast asleep. Emo Xiaoyao sat by the bed, half of his body leaning on the bed. He silently looked at Yi Li's sleeping face with a gentle gaze. Hearing Feng Jiao's voice, he sat up and said in a deep voice, "Come in." Feng Jiao walked in and glanced at the sleeping woman on the bed and the white-haired man still sitting by the bed. He sighed inside and reported in a deep voice, "Prince, all the people related to the assassins and the people that Sun Furen found have been imprisoned. We really have to." Those nobles who had been scared out of their wits did not know that the blood they saw today was just the tip of the iceberg. More people were waiting for Emo Xiaoyao's decision. Chapter 704. When a king was angry, blood would flow like a river. Feng Jiao couldn't help but think of his teacher's teachings and sighs when he was young. He didn't know if the people who planned today's events would regret it. Don't leave a single one alive. Emo Xiaoyao's voice was soft, his slender fingers gently brushing Yi Li's beautiful face. The meaning behind his words was filled with blood and murderous intent. Feng Jiao wasn't surprised by this. He thought for a moment and asked, "Prince, do you really think that this was done by Genom of Gojoseon?" This time, it could be said that Jinnan Palace's connections in the royal city had been completely uprooted. This included the entire Jinnan Palace. Even though Genom of Gojoseon didn't have many children, Lei Tingfeng had many children. Long before the Mahist army entered the city, Lei Tingfeng's 2 legitimate sons had already been taken out of the royal city. However, there were still a few illegitimate sons and daughters in the prince's palace. It wasn't that Genom of Gojoseon's actions didn't make sense. However, if it really was Genom of Gojoseon, it would be even more dangerous than this time. In fact, this time, if it wasn't for Princess Ding's special body, these assassins wouldn't have been able to touch a single hair on her. Moreover, Lei Enchanting couldn't possibly not understand that if Yi Li really was assassinated, it wouldn't be something that could be resolved by just killing a few people. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that the entire emperor of Shiling's city would be wiped out. Even if it wasn't him, it's because he didn't discipline him well. Emo Shuyao said coldly. Feng Jiao wasn't in the mood to sympathize with Lei Enchanting, who had been angered. He changed the topic and asked, "Prince killed by Qingning of the Bai family just like that. Is it really okay?" Emo Shuyao glanced at him coldly. "It's already been killed. What's the point of saying this?" Feng Jiao sighed helplessly. "What I mean is, what does the prince of the Bai family plan to do? I'm afraid that after this incident, the Bai family will have a knot in their hearts. The prince has to be on guard against them. No matter what, the Bai family was still one of the top families in Xiling." Emo Shuyao snorted coldly and said, "Can the Bai family have half a talent among the concubines? I don't need trash. This subordinate understands." Feng Jiao nodded. "How is Su Qingbai?" Emo Shuyao asked with a frown. If anything happened to Su Qingbai, given Li Li's temperament, she would definitely feel guilty for the rest of her life. This wasn't something Emo Shuyao wanted to see. Furthermore, Su Qingbai had blocked the sword for Li Li. If that sword had pierced Li Li's body. Thinking of this possibility, Emo Shuyao released his murderous aura without restraint. Feng Jiao raised his eyebrows. He didn't understand how the prince could release murderous aura just because he was concerned about 4th young Master Su's injuries. The doctor, the imperial physician, and our own military doctor have already examined 4th young master. He didn't injure any vital parts, but he lost a lot of blood. He's still unconscious now. I'm afraid he'll have to recuperate for a long time. Although he was unconscious, the doctor had prescribed him many sleeping and pain-relieving medicines. A sword pierced through his back. Not to mention a weak scholar like Su Qingbai, even martial artists like them would have to suffer a lot. Therefore it was better for him to sleep and suffer less. Emo Shuyao nodded. "Pass down the order to take good care of him. If anything happens to 4th young Master Su, don't blame I for being merciless." Feng Jiao was silent. After today, who would dare to go against Prince Ding's orders? Did they not want to live anymore? "Prince, Zhuojing requests an audience." Zhuojing's voice came from outside the door. Emo Shuyao said to Feng Jiao, "You go first." "Zhuojing, come in." Zhuojing walked in and brushed past Feng Jiao. Princess, it's nothing." Emo Shuyao said calmly, "What's the matter? I asked you to investigate." Zhuojing said respectfully, "The name list provided by Sun Huinyang is basically true. The person who instigated these people has already left the city. This subordinate ordered people to secretly follow him. The person seems to be from Dechu State. However, the information from the Prince Ding mansion did not reveal this person's identity. Now that the person is heading north, he should be heading in the direction of the Chu capital." Emo Shuyao lowered his eyes and muttered to himself for a moment. Dechu State. Emo Jingli has already gone south. Why is he going to the Chu capital? No. There is another person who has many people from Dechu State as his subordinates. Lin Yuan. Zhuojing's mind turned. Prince suspects that this is the work of the northern region? Emo Shuyao smiled but did not answer. He ordered calmly, "Send people to follow him." If he is really one of Ren Qining's men, Zhuijing silently waited for Mo Xiuyao's orders. After a long time, Mo Xiuyao chuckled. I remember that Ren Qining has a wife and several children from a northern region tribe, right? Yes. Ren Qining was able to become the ruler of the northern region as a member of a different tribe because he married the only daughter of the leader of the strongest tribe in the northern region. Kill them all, Mo Xiuyao said calmly. Yes, Prince. After sending Zhuijing away, the room became quiet again. Mo Xiuyao stared blankly at Yi Li's sleeping face. He lowered his head and kissed her gently. Lily, wake up. You don't know how scared I am when I see you lying here like this. If you don't wake up, I'm afraid that I won't be able to control myself and turn the entire West Hill into hell. I know you don't like this, so wake up quickly. In the Emperor of Shiling's palace, the Emperor of Shiling sat paralyzed on the dragon throne. His face was pale and he seemed to have no strength left in his body. The scene outside the flower garden today had not only shocked all the nobles of West Hill, but even he, the ruler of a country, was shocked. He saw the white-haired man in white sitting at the door looking at the person in front of him with a calm expression, as if he was neither happy nor angry. But every word that came out of his mouth was like a cloud of smoke, leaving a trail of blood behind. It was as if he could decide the life and death of the people at will. This was the state that the Emperor of Shiling yearned for the most. As an emperor, he could decide the life and death of the people at will. But now he began to doubt if he could really do it. Could he kill almost half of the nobles without batting an eyelid like Mo Xiuyao? The Emperor of Shiling shook his head weakly. He could not. Not only could he not, but even Enchanting could not do it. No matter how powerful they were, they could not be as decisive as Mo Xiuyao and as cold as him. Your Majesty. The servant in front of him looked worriedly at the Emperor of Shiling. His Majesty had been in a daze ever since he returned from outside the palace, but he refused to summon an imperial physician. He could not help but worry these people who were close to him. But when he thought of the scene in the morning, he felt that His Majesty's behavior was normal. Even people like them who had seen too much darkness and blood were still trembling at this moment. How is Princess Lingyun? After a long while, the Emperor of Shiling asked in a low voice. Although he had never been close to his daughter, the Emperor of Shiling did not have many children. Princess Lingyun was one of the more outstanding ones. Now that she had died like this, it was impossible to say that he was not sad at all. But no matter how sad he was as a father, he did not have the ability and courage to seek justice for his daughter. The servant said carefully, the princess's body has been sent back to her residence. The Ministry of Rites has chosen an auspicious day to bury the princess. Your Majesty, please take care of your body. Chapter 705. The Emperor of Shiling smiled helplessly and said, never mind. Compared to those people, at least she didn't suffer much. Tell the Ministry of Rites to prepare the princess's funeral as soon as possible. Let's head to An City in advance. Whether it was because he felt that he had failed and couldn't face it, or because he was afraid of the Mahist army and Prince Ding, the Emperor of Shiling didn't have the slightest bit of fear towards the imperial city anymore. This old servant obeys. Your Majesty, news just came from outside the palace. The concubine sons of Prince Rui in Jinnan Palace are all dead. After thinking for a while, the chamberlain felt that he should tell the emperor some good news. The Emperor of Shiling opened his eyes. Oh, really? It's absolutely true. I'm afraid this matter is related to the South Vanquishing King. Prince Ding destroyed Genin of Gojoseon and Prince Rui's mansion in a fit of anger. Not a single one of them was left alive. At this point, the old chamberlain couldn't help but shiver. The Emperor of Shiling was stunned for a while before he chuckled and said, Enchanting, how could he have foreseen this day? Forget it at least. Enchanting's forces were all destroyed by Mo Xiuyao. Let's leave the imperial city and head to An City as soon as possible. Tell them not to provoke this fiend anymore. This old servant obeys. When Yi Li woke up, it was already 3 days later. Although 3 days wasn't a long time, the Prince Ding mansion's efficiency had always been high. Therefore, in these 3 days, the remaining forces in and out of the imperial city had all been wiped out by Qin Feng, Feng Jiao and the others. As for how many people's families and businesses had been destroyed and how many people's heads had fallen, it wasn't something that ordinary people could know. But even so, Many people noticed that many familiar faces in the imperial city had disappeared overnight. It was not easy to live peacefully in this chaotic world. Even if they had any doubts, they would quietly suppress them to the bottom of their hearts. Fourth brother. Fourth brother. Yili suddenly opened her eyes and grabbed the wrist of the person in front of her. When she saw the person sitting by the bed clearly, she was slightly startled. Eldest aunt. It was first Madame of the Su family who was sitting by the bed. She was holding a warm handkerchief in her hand and was about to wipe her sweat when Yili suddenly grabbed it. She was also shocked. Li, you're finally awake? Seeing that she had woken up, first Madame of the Su family was also delighted, and a relieved smile appeared on her gentle and loving face. She had traveled thousands of miles to the West Hill for her son. Other than the time when she traveled from Yunzhou to Li City, this was the first time Madame Su had traveled so far in her life. Unexpectedly, when he arrived at Glass City, his son and niece were both unconscious on the bed. If it weren't for Feng Jiao who went to greet them, telling them to take care of themselves, Madame Su would have fainted from fright. Eldest aunt. Having just woken up, Yili's mind was in a mess for a moment. She suddenly remembered the scene before she fainted and couldn't help but sit up. Eldest aunt, fourth brother. Madame Su hurriedly held her down and said, "It's okay, your fourth brother is fine. Why are you so careless?" "I'm sorry. Eldest aunt, fourth brother did it because of me." Thinking of how fourth brother threw himself in front of her and how the sword pierced through her chest, Yili's face turned pale. Fourth brother was a weak scholar who didn't even have the strength to truss a chicken. Yili didn't dare to imagine how bad the situation was. Thinking of her son who was still lying motionless on the bed, Madame Su's eyes couldn't help but redden. Seeing her son wrapped in a thick white gauze and his pale face, how could Madame Su as a mother not be heartbroken? But how could this kind of thing be blamed on Yili? How could she, as a mother, not know her son's nature? Even if it wasn't for Yili, Su Qingbai would still throw himself at any one of the brothers. It would be strange if her son didn't block that sword. Madame Su patted the back of Yili's hand and said gently, "Silly child, your fourth brother is fine. Why are you crying? I'm talking about you. Didn't you learn some medical skills from Dr. Lin? How come you don't even know that you're not feeling well?" Yili was stunned. Madame Su shook her head with a smile and said, "Silly child, you're already 3 months pregnant. You even gave birth to a child. How could you not pay attention at all?" This time Yili was completely stunned. Even when Madame Su raised her hand to wipe her tears, she didn't come back to her senses. After a long while, she lowered her head and reached out to touch her flat stomach. Then she put her left hand on her right hand's pulse and said in a panic, I can't feel it. What's wrong with the child?" Although Yili had learned some medical skills from Dr. Lin, most of them were about pharmacology and poisons. And medical skills were obviously not a subject that could be understood by analogy. It was difficult for a person who had studied medicine for less than half a year to clearly distinguish between a slippery pulse and pregnancy. Not to mention Yili was a little panicked at this moment. People like Mo Xiao couldn't even feel a pulse in a panic, let alone diagnose it. Madame Su comforted her with a smile. "It's okay. The child is fine. It's just that you're too careless. If something happens, it won't be just your problem." Yili looked down at her stomach in a daze. This time she was indeed careless. Although she had experienced it once before, this time, except for the ups and downs of her mood, the child had been very well behaved. Basically, it didn't cause her any physical discomfort. And there was a 2-day period every month. Because of the great loss when she gave birth to Mo and Xiaobao, although she carefully recuperated, there were always times when it wasn't accurate. Therefore, she only thought that it was because of the soil and water in West Hill that she was temporarily disrupted. Also, there hadn't been any news in the past few years. Yili almost habitually stopped thinking about it. "Anyway, it's good that you're awake. I haven't sent someone to inform Prince Ding yet." Madame Su smiled. "Yili." Before she finished speaking, Mo Xiaoyao's voice came from outside the door. Mo Xiaoyao's white figure swept into the room, startling Madame Su. Obviously, he didn't know who reported it, so he directly used his lightness skill to run over. "Xiaoyao." Yili looked up at the white-haired man in front of her. Although he didn't look bad, Yili could feel his tension and fatigue. The white figure flashed and Yili was pulled into a cool embrace. Mo Xiaoyao buried his head in her shoulder, deeply inhaling the familiar fragrance. His voice was low and hoarse. You're finally awake. Yili's heart ached inexplicably. She raised her hand to wrap around his thin waist and said in a low voice, I'm sorry to have made you worry. Not far away, Madame Su looked at the young couple in front of her with a gratified smile. She quietly retreated, leaving space for the young couple to talk. Chapter 706. Xuyao. Leaning into Emo Xuyao's arms, Yili's heart was filled with apologies. This time she was indeed too careless, resulting in such an accident. She even implicated her fourth brother. These past few days must have been very difficult for this person in front of her. Raising her hands, Yili tightly hugged his waist and said in a low voice, Xuyao, I'm sorry. This time it's my fault. It won't happen again. It's not Li's fault. It's my fault. I actually didn't realize that Li was pregnant again. Emo Xuyao's hand gently covered her flat stomach, where their child was once again pregnant. Ever since Emo Xuyao had Emo Xiaobao, the matter of whether or not he had children became more and more indifferent to him. He even faintly hoped that they would never have children again in the future. But logically he also knew that having 2 more children would be better for Li in the future. But the 2 times in a row the children came at the wrong time. It even caused Li to almost encounter danger. This caused a trace of unhappiness to appear in Emo Xuyao's eyes. Yili raised her head and helplessly looked at the man in front of her, whose expression suddenly became gloomy. Back when she was pregnant with Xiaobao he was also like this. Emo Xuyao sometimes looked at the child in her stomach with a gentle expression, and sometimes gloomy expression, which made Yili faintly worried. But Yili still believed that he would love their child. Xuyao, do you think it will be a girl this time? Yili leaned against Emo Xuyao and asked with a smile. Girl? Emo Xuyao's heart trembled slightly. Imagining a daughter who was as clever as Li, his expression couldn't help but soften. Yili smiled and said, That's right. We already have Xiaobao. I hope that it will be a girl this time. That way Xiaobao will have a younger sister. With Xiaobao's age now, when he grows up, won't he be able to protect his younger sister? Emo Xuyao also felt that it made sense. If it was a daughter like Li, then she would be the only princess in the Prince Ding mansion in the past few decades. Naturally she would be pampered. Since Xiaobao had nothing to do, let him properly protect his younger sister. Emo Xuyao silently considered whether or not he should strengthen Xiaobao's training when they returned, so that he wouldn't be unable to protect his younger sister in the future. Of course Yili's heart's happy. She just woke up, her body was fine and her body was fine. With her body's body. With her fourth brother also woke up. Li only felt with her mood felt exceptionally happy, as felts, she only felt her hearts, and her fourth brother was also her fourth brother with. Yili felt her especially happy. With her. The inexplicable depression in his heart from a few days ago seemed to have disappeared. Leaning into Emo Xuyao's embrace, Yili softly spoke of her expectations and love for her upcoming baby. Emo Xuyao hugged Yili and silently listened. After a while Yili finally stopped and let out a soft sigh. Raising her head to look at the person hugging her, she saw that he had already closed his eyes and fallen asleep. There was a faint shadow under his closed eyes. Yili carefully lifted her hand to seal 2 of his pressure points. Just now she carefully got up to make room for him to lie on the bed. Then she pulled the blanket over him and carefully covered him. Looking at the handsome face of the person in deep sleep, Yili faintly smiled. In this world the only person who could successfully seal Prince Ding's pressure points was probably her, right? In the relay station, naturally, everyone was happy because Yili and Su Qingbai had woken up. However, on the other side of the Imperial City, the Bai family was in a state of panic and gloominess. Bai Yunqing fell into a chair in the hall. His face, which was already old, now looked even more haggard. Originally, after knowing that his daughter had been killed by Prince Ding, although Bai Yunqing was angry and heartbroken, he still had some confidence. In his heart he secretly planned everything. However, he did not expect Prince Ding to be so ruthless. In just a short 2 to 3 days he had wiped out all the forces in the Imperial City. Even the Jinnan Palace had been destroyed by him. Bai Yunqing's only hope, the Emperor of Xiling, was also scared out of his wits by Emo Xuyao. He said that there was no need to wait for 2 months. After the palace was tidied up he would immediately leave Foreign City. The Bai family, who had previously openly submitted to the Prince Ding mansion, was naturally abandoned by the Emperor of Xiling without hesitation. If it was a few years ago when the Empress and imperial concubine Qingrong were still alive, the Emperor of Xiling would have to give some face to Bai Yunqing. However, imperial concubine Qingrong had been missing for a long time and the Empress had long passed away. The Emperor of Xiling naturally would not protect the Bai family, who were useless and disloyal to him. Perhaps from the beginning submitting to the Prince Ding mansion was already a mistake. Bai Yunqing thought bitterly. Not submitting to the Prince Ding and following the Emperor of Xiling to An City, even if the Bai family could not prosper with the Bai family's background, at least they would not be killed. But now, thinking of the scene outside the Sun family's garden that day, Bai Yunqing only felt a chill in his heart. Prince Ding, would he really give the Bai family a way out? Master, what do we do now? Madame Bai also looked haggard. Even her usual makeup could not hide the wrinkles and panic on her face. What do we do? What do we do? How do I know what to do? Bai Yunqing smiled bitterly. Madame Bai looked at Bai Yunqing and said cautiously, Master, why don't let's leave the imperial city early. Bai Yunqing looked at her indifferently and scolded, ignorant woman, how can Prince Ding allow us to leave the imperial city safely like this? If Prince Ding wanted to punish them, how could they leave? If Prince Ding did not intend to punish them, how could he be willing to leave so much family property alone? Madame Bai also panicked for a moment. After being scolded by Bai Yunqing, she knew that what she said was not practical. She could only grab Bai Yunqing's arm in a panic and said anxiously, Then what should we do? Should we go and beg the people in the Prince Ding mansion? Right now they could not see Prince Ding and Princess Ding at all. These matters were handled by Feng Jiao and Princess Ding's two trusted subordinates. Moreover, even if there was a chance, Madame Bai was sure that she did not want to see Prince Ding again. Hearing this, Bai Yunqing thought for a moment. He carefully thought about what his wife said. Although Prince Ding did not seem to have any intention of doing anything to the Bai family, from the fact that Prince Ding did not hesitate to kill Bai Qingning, Bai Yunqing absolutely believed that Prince Ding was dissatisfied with the Bai family. However, it was this kind of indifference that made people even more worried. Madame Bai looked at Bai Yunqing, who was deep in thought, and asked carefully, Master, I don't know if Princess Ding has woken up. If we can plead with the princess. I heard that the princess comes from a scholarly family and has a gentle and kind heart. Although Qingning is a bit inappropriate, our Bai family has not done anything wrong to the Prince Ding mansion. Perhaps the princess will be merciful and not kill us? It will not be easy to see Princess Ding now. Princess Ding had just been assassinated. With how much Prince Ding cared for the princess, how could he allow someone who was not a trusted subordinate to get close to Princess Ding? Madame Bai's eyes flashed and she said anxiously, Is there no other way? Is our Bai family really going to? Bai Yunqing thought for a moment and finally said, Maybe. His Majesty will go to An City in a few days. At that time, Prince Ding and Princess Ding will definitely go to see him off. If we can see Princess Ding at that time, we may be able to plead with the princess. Madame Bai's eyes lit up and she said with a smile, Master is right. Unless Princess Ding has not recovered, according to etiquette, Prince Ding and Princess Ding must go together to see His Majesty off. At that time, I will definitely find a way to see Princess Ding and beg her for mercy. Chapter 707. The more Bai Yunqing thought about it, the more he felt that it was possible. He nodded and said, Madam is right. Madam, rest well these few days and don't worry. I'll arrange the meeting with Princess Ding. Then I'll have to trouble you. Madame Bai said with a smile. A trace of resentment flashed through her slightly lowered eyes. Not long after the news of the Mahist army occupying the imperial city reached the Dechu state, came the news that Immerse had almost massacred the West Hill bigwigs. Enchanting, who was leading the Eastern Army all the way to the south, had yet to recover from the blow of the imperial city's fall when he heard the news. Another bigger blow came head-on, almost making him dizzy and disoriented. Since he had given up on returning to the west, the fall of the imperial city was almost a foregone conclusion. Although Enchanting did not expect it to be so fast, he was still mentally prepared. However, Immerse's ruthless purging of the imperial city's bigwigs was completely out of Enchanting's expectations. As a result, Enchanting's many years of connections in the imperial city, and even the families of his generals were all implicated. Not to mention there were also his own grandchildren among them. Hearing this news, Enchanting was so angry that he almost fainted on the spot. He gritted his teeth and squeezed out a few words. "Emo Shuyao, Prince?" The guard beside him quickly reached out to support him. Enchanting raised his hand to cover his mouth. Bright red blood seeped out from between his fingers. "Prince, please take care of yourself." Everyone present was shocked. They did not have time to be angry or sad. They hurried forward to check on Enchanting. Although their journey had been smooth and they had occupied a large part of the Dechu state's land. However, because of Murongshin's interference, they did not manage to occupy the entire south as expected before Emo Jingli moved south. The current situation in Dechu state could be said to be a mess. Most of the south of the Cloud Mist River was in Emo Jingli's hands, and a small portion of it was occupied by them. The Xiling army controlled part of the north of the Yunlan River, but behind them was Murongshin's army, which had just moved north. Although there were only 200,000 people, it was enough to cause them a lot of trouble as they continued to move south. Further southwest was Lu Songxian's 400,000-strong army. Further north was the territory of the Northwest Mahist army. Further north was the Dechu state's garrison, which was left behind to guard the northern Jin and the northern tribes, who were in a chaotic battle. It could be said that there wasn't a single place in the Dechu state that wasn't in chaos. At this time, Genom of Gojoseon absolutely couldn't allow any accidents to happen. Enchanting steadied his mind and suppressed the sweetness that rushed up to his throat. He waved away the guard who was supporting him and said in a deep voice, "I am fine. You can leave first." Everyone looked hesitantly at Enchanting's ashen face and finally left the study. What exactly is going on? After a while, Enchanting's voice sounded in the study. The man who came to deliver the message didn't look too good either. In a deep voice, he recounted everything that had happened in the Emperor of Shiling's city. From Su Qingbai's advance to the Imperial City, to the Emperor of Shiling's willingness to give up the Imperial City, to the assassination of Princess Ding, to Prince Ding's anger and bloodshed in the Sun family's garden. Idiot. After listening to the man's report, Enchanting could only squeeze out these two words. Even his breathing gradually became coarse. That idiot. I should have crippled him back then. Why didn't he think? Why didn't he think that those who died were not only Ai's trusted subordinates, but also the elites of Xiling? These people were killed by Emo Shuyao. I'm afraid he's still secretly happy in his heart, right? Why didn't he think that these people are all dead, Xiling? Does he have the ability to govern Xiling alone? Enchanting's voice gradually became louder. It was obvious that he was extremely angry. Enchanting's words were indeed correct. Although those who were killed were Enchanting's men, it should be known that Enchanting had been in control of the imperial court for more than 10 years. How many of the capable people in the imperial court were not his men? After being killed by Emo Shuyao, those who remained were just a bunch of mediocre people. Even if the Emperor of Xiling moved the capital to An City, the Emperor of Xiling, who had no experience in governing a country, brought a bunch of mediocre people with him. Only heaven knew what they could do. Emo Shuyao, what a good move, what a good scheme. Enchanting laughed coldly. After venting some of his anger, Enchanting quickly calmed down. He also quickly realized that something was amiss. His sharp eyes narrowed slightly and he asked in a low voice, "I don't remember when I gave the order to assassinate Princess Ding? Who acted on their own initiative?" The man was also at a loss. He was just an extremely inconspicuous person that Genom of Gojoseon had placed in the Imperial City. Usually he was only in charge of some news from the marketplace. That was why he was able to escape the calamity at the Prince Ding mansion and hurried over to deliver the news. However, he also did not understand the cause of this matter and only thought that it was an order from the prince. Seeing that he was at a loss, Enchanting also knew that he would not be able to get anything out of him. He waved his hand and dismissed him. After the man left, Enchanting waved his hand and swept the ink slab on the table to the ground. The ink slab made a crisp sound as it hit the ground. Even the good quality ink slab was smashed into pieces. Investigate. Who is so daring? Mo Jingli. No, Emo Jingli does not have this ability. Investigate Rin Qining Yelu Hong and Yelu Yi for I. His prince. The gold-robed guards who were hidden in the shadows answered and left. Only Enchanting was left in the study room. Enchanting was silent for a long time. Finally he spat out a mouthful of blood. Northwest Fei Hong Pass. Young Master Qing Chen, dressed in a spotless white robe, stood on top of the gate tower of Fei Hong Pass and looked out. Not far away was the main camp of the Xiling army and the Northern Tribes army. Looking up from the bottom of the pass, the handsome young master in white stood in the wind. His expression was calm and tranquil like a celestial being. Not to mention the soldiers of the two armies, even the commanders of the two armies could not help but sigh at young Master Qing Chen's elegance. Qingbai is injured? On the gate tower, Su Qingchen turned around and looked at the shadow guard who came to deliver the message. He raised his eyebrows slightly. The shadow guard felt his heart skip a beat and a chill run down his spine. Although young Master Qingchen was known as the celestial young master and was not as imposing as Prince, the pressure he gave off was indeed the same. Young master, it is indeed so. But the letter also said that fourth young master did not suffer any vital injuries. I think he should have woken up by now. Su Qingchen nodded and said, I understand. You may go. The shadow guard secretly wiped his sweat and cupped his hands. This subordinate will take his leave. Young Master Qingchen, do you really think that Lei Zhenting sent someone to assassinate Princess Ding? Lei Zhenting should not be so unwise. The two men beside Su Qingchen also stood in the wind. One of them had white hair. Although his expression was gentle, there was a hint of determination between his brows. The other middle-aged man was in his early 30s. He looked calm and was somewhat similar to the old man. These two people were the Southern Marquis's son and son who were almost killed by Mo Jingqi. At that time, the two of them almost lost their lives because of Mo Jingqi's persecution. Although Mo Shiyao and Yi Li saved them, they were somewhat disheartened. These years they lived in seclusion in the northwest and did not have much reputation. But now that Mo Jingqi was dead, the Dechu state was almost dead. The northwest was also facing the pressure of the western hill and the northern tribes. The southern marquis and his son naturally could not sit still. They took the initiative to accompany Su Qingchen to Fei Hong Pass. Chapter 708. Su Qingchen's handsome face turned cold. Even if it wasn't Lei Zhenting's idea, he still can't get away with it. Although Marquis Nan had spent the rest of his life as a coward, he was still a fierce general who had once galloped on the battlefield. As an outsider he could see things more clearly. He stroked his beard and smiled. This time, I'm afraid that Lei Zhenting was also schemed against. Genom of Gojosian's loss this time was not small. Genom of Gojosian was probably vomiting blood from the heartache right now. Prince Ding had been in hiding for many years, but every time he made a move, it was enough to shock the world. Fu Zhao, who was standing behind his father, asked worriedly, Prince Ding's actions might affect the prince's reputation. Even though they were far away in the northwest, Prince Ding's name had spread throughout the entire northwest. There was no need to doubt other places as well. As people from the Prince Ding mansion, they naturally knew that the number of people Prince Ding had killed was not as many as the rumors said. However, the influence of these people was more serious than if he had really massacred an entire city. Now the rumors outside had become that Prince Ding had massacred the entire emperor of Xiling City. Even the matter that had been suppressed in Bian City had been brought up. For a time many scholars had a bad impression of Prince Ding. However, the Su family, who held the most power in the northwest and was the leader of the humanities in the northwest, did not say anything. This made Fu Zhao somewhat puzzled. Su Qingchen smiled faintly. Brother Fu, you still don't see it clearly. As the saying goes, preventing people from talking is more important than preventing a river from flowing. It's better to let it out than to block it. When they say they are satisfied, they will naturally stop talking. Won't this affect Prince Ding's reputation? Fu Zhao frowned and asked. People who wanted to rule the world would always pay more attention to their reputation. Su Qingchen turned to look at Marquis Nan and asked, Marquis Nan, what do you think? Marquis Nan shook his head and said, the winner is the king and the loser is the thief. A short message is nothing. Moreover, rumors were just rumors. Once the rumors were dispelled, the world would only respect Prince Ding even more. As for those nerds who have become stupid from reading too much, I'm sure Master Prince Ding won't care about them. Su Qingchen nodded and said with a smile, Marquis Nan is right. Given the relationship between the Su family and the Prince Ding mansion, unless it is absolutely necessary, the Su family won't easily speak up for Prince Ding. What's more, now that the world is in chaos, Prince Ding's reputation is not bad. At the very least, there were more people who were afraid of Mo Xiao than those who dared to scheme against him, and there were fewer people who dared to betray the Prince Ding mansion. Sometimes, fear was also a very good way to control people. Of course, he couldn't go overboard. Wasn't the assassination attempt on Princess Ding a very good reason? In the future, Lear would be safer, right? After this, the world should know that even if Prince Ding was deeply in love with the princess, if something happened to Princess Ding, Master Prince Ding wouldn't collapse or fall. He would only become crazier and more cold-blooded. Now Prince Ding is still in West Hill. When Prince Ding returns to Glass City, will there be any accidents in West Hill? Marquis Nan asked worriedly. Su Qingchen said, Qingbai is still a little young. However, after this lesson he should understand what it means to use severe measures in troubled times. Marquis Nan and his son couldn't help but look at each other. Fu Zhao raised his eyebrows and looked at Su Qingchen curiously. Master Qingchen, you don't seem to feel sorry for those nobles in West Hill? Although many of them were related to assassins, everyone knew that most of them were the confidants of Genom of Gojoseon and the truly talented people in West Hill. Prince Ding's action had cut off the talents in West Hill for the next 10 years. Su Qingchen smiled coldly. As long as Prince Ding doesn't kill the common people, as for those people, how many of them are truly innocent? Even if they are innocent. Looking out of the pass, the land outside Feihong Pass was barren and broken walls and wails could be heard everywhere. Su Qingchen raised his hand and pointed to a place far away. Is there anyone more innocent than them? The truly innocent were the common people struggling in the war. It wasn't suitable for the nobles who started the war. Marquis Nan sighed softly. Master Qingchen is right. Looking into the distance, those places used to be his homeland. But now there were wails everywhere and rivers of blood flowed. Su Qingchen raised his eyebrows slightly and said lightly, if it's not Genom of Gojoseon's idea, then there's only one person who has the ability to do so. Ren Qining. Very good. If I don't do something to repay him, wouldn't Qingbai and Li Er's suffering be in vain? Someone come. A man in black appeared behind Su Qingchen. It was Wei Lin, who had been left behind by Yi Li in the northwest. Wei Lin, go to the Chu capital personally. Tell Leng Haoyu that there's no need to return to the northwest for the time being. Assist the De Chu state's army in defending the Chu capital. Su Qingchen said lightly. Wei Lin didn't ask any more questions. He nodded and said in a low voice, I understand. I'll take my leave. Master Qingchen, defending the Chu capital is a little... Marquis Nan frowned. He had some understanding of the De Chu state's military strength and combat power. Even with Leng Huai and Duke Hua, the Chu capital couldn't be defended for 3 months. And within 3 months, it would be difficult for the Mahist army to send reinforcements to the Chu capital. Su Qingchen smiled lightly and said, General Lu's hundreds of thousands of troops have been restless for a long time. It's just that they didn't dare to move because they were guarding against Lei Zhenting. Now that Lei Zhenting is fighting to the death with Mo Jingli, it's too late to withdraw even if they want to. Once we resolve the siege in front of us, there should be enough time to go to the Chu capital. By then the prince should be back. Marquis Nan silently calculated. He felt that although Su Qingchen's move was risky, it wasn't impossible. Most importantly, if they succeeded, then the Prince Ding Mansion's territory would more than double its current size. But this way we'll have to face the entire northern tribes and northern territory. There's also Lei Zhenting in the south. Once he stabilizes his position, it's hard to say if he won't turn around and surround us with the northern tribes and northern territory. With Mo Jingli's courage, I'm afraid he won't be able to stop him. Su Qingchen smiled lightly and said, Doesn't Lei Zhenting still have Murong Shen? Besides, we still have an ambush in the De Chu state. Chapter 709. Hearing Su Qingchen's words, Marquis Nan and his son were also shocked. The Prince Ding Mansion and the De Chu state had been at odds for so many years, but there was still an ambush in the De Chu state. Even now the De Chu state was in chaos and war, but it was still not exposed. This made the two of them marvel at the power of the Prince Ding Mansion. However, both of them knew their limits. Since Su Qingchen did not elaborate, they would not ask. Marquis Nan looked at the fluttering banners not far from the pass and asked, How do you plan to deal with the Northern Tribes army and the Shilling army outside the pass? Su Qingchen said indifferently, the northern tribes are bent on conquering the territory of the Dechu state. They will not fight us head-on. As for the Xiling army, they were just following behind the northern tribes' army and waving their flags and shouting. Since that's the case, let's take down these two groups of people together. Marquis Nan looked at Su Qingchen and asked, "Are you confident?" Su Qingchen smiled and said, "Marching to war is Marquis Nan's business. How can you ask me if I have confidence? I am ashamed to say that I am able to come up with a plan or two, but I am not good at military matters." Marquis Nan smiled and said, "Young master is too modest." Just based on Su Qingchen's plan, he could not be considered someone who did not know anything about military matters. However, compared to young master Qingchen's literary talent, this point was not so conspicuous. "I am not modest. For this battle I will have to trouble Marquis Nan and General Liu," Su Qingchen said seriously. Knowing that Qingchen was entrusting the Feihong Pass and the soldiers of the Mo family army to him, Nan Ho's heart warmed. He said seriously, "Please rest assured, young master Qingchen. This old man will not dare to slack off." "That is good." Su Qingchen nodded and smiled. "Let the northern tribes see if the Mahist army, which has not fought for many years, is inferior to them." It was a simple and casual sentence, but it caused a sense of pride to rise in Nan Ho's heart. Although he had fought many battles in the first half of his life, he had never thought that he would be able to lead the Mahist army against the northern tribes in the western hills. On this day outside the city of the Emperor of Xiling, there was a surge of people and the atmosphere was awe-inspiring. The soldiers of the Mo family army, dressed in black, had already replaced the original soldiers of the West Hill and stood on the city wall. This also meant that the Emperor of Xiling's city now belonged to the Mahist army. Outside the city gate, a bright yellow flag embroidered with dragon patterns fluttered in the wind. Rows of carriages of all kinds were lined up by the side of the road outside the imperial city, waiting for the time to set off. Today was the day when the Emperor of Xiling officially left the imperial city for An City. Many nobles and ministers left with the West Hill. As for the common people, although there were some who left with the Emperor of Xiling, there were not many of them. For the common people, loyalty to the Emperor of Xiling and patriotism were very far away from them. Furthermore, the Emperor of Xiling's city was not forcefully conquered by the Mahist army, but was given up by the Emperor of Xiling. Thus, there were naturally fewer common people who were willing to follow the Emperor of Xiling. The Mahist army had always had a good reputation. Rather than follow the Emperor of Xiling and give up the place they had lived and worked for generations to go to an unknown place, it was better to live peacefully under the command of the Prince Ding mansion. Thus, in the packed crowd outside the city, there were more people who came to see them off or to watch the show than those who wanted to follow them. This made the Emperor of Xiling feel somewhat desolate, but the common people were the most common people in the world. The Emperor of Xiling naturally did not think much of them. "Prince Ding Wangfei is here." The Emperor of Xiling was going to leave. Mo Shuyao and Yi Li naturally had to come to see him off. Fortunately, after a few days of rest, Yi Li had recovered greatly. But Su Qingbai was still lying in bed and unable to move. Mo Shuyao wrapped an arm around Yi Li's waist and protected her in his arms, not avoiding the gazes of the people around them. But Yi Li found to her shock that the people around them, especially the high officials and nobles, did not have the usual respectful and fawning expressions when they saw them, but were filled with extreme fear. When she looked closely, she found that these people's fearful gazes were not directed at her, but at the people around her. She couldn't help but raise her head to look at Mo Shuyao in puzzlement. Because Yi Li was pregnant, and Mo Shuyao faintly found that Yi Li did not like him killing wantonly, or Mo Shuyao himself was not willing to let Yi Li know of his personality. A few days after Yi Li woke up, the people around her did not tell her what had happened while she was unconscious. Yi Li naturally did not know why these people were so fearful. "Your Majesty, I wish your Majesty a safe journey." Mo Shuyao raised his hands in a salute to the Emperor of Xiling and said with a laugh. The Xiling Emperor could not help but be stunned. He actually felt a little overwhelmed by the favor. He hurriedly returned the greeting and said, "I accept Prince Ding's auspicious words. Zhen also congratulates Prince Ding and Wang Fei on the birth of a son." Yi Li nodded with a faint smile and said, "Many thanks, Your Majesty." "Take care, Your Majesty." Even though the feeling of having to smile at this person who had taken over a large portion of his land and imperial city was very bitter, But fortunately he was about to leave this place and completely leave Mo Shuyao, the god of death. This caused the Emperor of Shiling's smile to become more sincere. He said with a smile, "Many thanks, Wang Fei. Jim will leave." Mo Shuyao smiled faintly and said, "I won't see you out." The Emperor of Shiling's dragon sedan stopped in the middle of the road not far away, surrounded by the palace guards and palace maids. Behind the dragon sedan were the carriages of the imperial concubines, princesses and members of the imperial family. Seeing the Emperor of Shiling being helped onto the dragon sedan, the others followed and prepared to depart. After the dragon sedan started to move, Mo Shuyao waved his hand to the people who had come to see him off and said, "All right, you can all leave." Supporting Yi Li, he turned to return to the city. The people behind him were silent. "Prince, you should at least act more realistically. Even if you don't watch him leave, at least don't hurry to turn and leave before the Emperor of Shiling's dragon sedan has even taken a step away." But the generals of the Mahist army naturally had no objections. The original nobles of Shiling were also not in the mood to show respect to their old master in front of their new master. After a moment of silence, they all left. Princess Ding. Concubine requests an audience with Princess Ding. Yi Li and Mo Shuyao were just about to enter the city when they heard a sharp cry from behind them. Yi Li turned and saw Madame Bai rushing towards her with an anxious expression. Unfortunately, after the assassination attempt, Yi Li's guards had all been replaced by Qi Lin after Yi Li woke up. While Yi Li was not willing to do this, she knew that the incident this time must have frightened many people. So she did not object. She just thought of it as reassuring those who cared about her. Madame Bai had just called out Princess Ding when she was stopped by the guards of the Prince Ding mansion. She was still a dozen steps away from Yi Li. Seeing that Yi Li was about to be helped into the city by Mo Shuyao, Madame Bai was unwilling and shouted, "Wang Fei? Concubine requests an audience with Wang Fei?" Everyone present was silent. Of course they knew about the Bai family. The daughter of the Bai family had been killed by Prince Ding that day. Many people guessed when the Prince Ding mansion planned to move against the Bai family. You're tuning in to the Biao's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.